The first time I realized the watching wasn't just them, not just sedans and suits and polite letters with too many seals, was at the car wash. It was a Tuesday afternoon that smelled like thaw. I pulled into the tunnel because Salt had written its winter story across the truck, and the truck deserved amnesty. In the glass booth, a kid with a nose ring mouthed neutral. Hands off the wheel like a parent mouthing pleas at a toddler. The conveyor caught. The brushes loomed. The world turned to foam. And in that little synthetic cave, in the industrial rain, the strips of rubber began to sway in time with a rhythm that wasn't the motor. Slow, exact, too exact, an evenness that had insult in it. The blue light that makes soap look like nightclub weather strobe once. Then again, then settled into a pulse my beak brain knew as 74. I laughed alone at the thought, because laughing first still buys me inches. The kid in the booth looked up from his phone and frowned as if he'd heard something not on his playlist. The brushes kissed the windshield and drew crosshatches into suds. A lattice ghost, then another, then gone under rinse. When the dryer roared, it cut out mid-breath, a perfect half, then resumed. The truck rolled forward into ordinary sunlight, like a man stepping out an interrogation, pretending his shirt isn't on backward. Back on the road, I told myself what I have learned to tell myself. Accident is a holy thing. Do not surrender it. But accident had been bleeding out of the city all week. At the bank, the queue stuttered, then arranged itself into neat, equidistant intervals without tape. At the pharmacy, the ceiling camera panned and then held a steady center not on any register, but at a point in the air where 4 aisles formed a cross. At a 4-way stop, all 4 drivers started at the same instant, as if the intersection had issued a command. On the radio, call-in shows arrived without crosstalk, no laughter stepping on anyone. Every voice falling into a disciplined human talk hates. It felt like weather, like a high-pressure system of order moving across town. The other surveillance, our kind, kept its rituals. The black sedan did laps around our block, like an old man pacing a hospital hallway. I started mapping it, the way I map wind over ridge lines. 10 minutes on, 30 off, back for a drive-by when the house is darkest. Some days it traded places with a government SUV that wore its plates like a joke. I learned a trick. If I brought a bag of screws out onto the porch and poured them into a metal bowl and shook it once, the sedan rolled on a block farther. Friction is a prayer if you work it. Moran texted, "They'll soften you with symmetry. Break it where you can." The woman added, "Public places can be safest, or cruelest. Choose your noises." I chose an arena. The high school gym smelled like old victories and recent disinfectant. My daughter's class chorus was due to embarrass itself by trying a 3-part harmony under lights that had been flickering since the Bush administration. The bleachers groaned when we climbed. Parents smiled with the practiced heroism of people who attend and clap, and tuck the worst day of their lives into their pockets, so it doesn't show in photos. The show had programs and errors and a microphone that whined because microphones are the only creatures left brave enough to be imperfect for free. I counted that whine like a rosary. When the 5th grade drummers flailed into something that could have become rhythm if any of them had been God, the gym lights held steady for the first time in their career. I felt it in my cage of ribs. The room had decided enough play. I looked for the lattice and didn't find it. What I found was worse. The audience relaxing into exactness. People who don't know each other don't sway at the same speed. We were swaying. The applause after first song was the kind of applause conductors dream about. On the beat, no stragglers, no seconds lost searching for courage. I clapped off. Laura glanced at me, trying to telegraph not here. The metronome in my pocket. Yes, I had brought it. I bring it everywhere. Tick my skin at 74 as if asking for permission to be a joke. At the second song, my daughter's group, the gym found a new key. The first 2 rows of singers forgot to breathe wrong, which children always do. Their inhale matched a crisp, clean wave, like 1,000 pages turned at once. The note they landed on was beautiful and wrong. Perfect in a way I have learned to distrust. The music teacher, sweet and scattered, glanced at the ceiling as if she'd been given a metronome from God and wasn't sure whether to bow. I could have let it go. I could have sat on my hands and let the room be an instrument tuned to an ear that wasn't ours. But my daughter was in there, singing without error, and fear moved me faster than wisdom. I took out my keys and dropped them on the bleacher. Metal on metal, a clatter, half a beat before the downbeat. A nothing, a mistake. The sound tore a seam in the gym, not visible. Felt a slippage, a reset. The applause mislanded. A child in the back row giggled. The lights flickered their old bad flicker. The perfect note bruised at one edge into something human. My daughter, God bless her traitorous blood, smiled midward, a real smile, and then kept singing because she understands duty and mischief are not enemies. The song ended ragged. The applause was a mess. I cried in the way fathers pretend to hide. On the way out, a man in a polo with a badge, lanyard, and big friendly forums stepped next to me without touching. "Mr. Price," he said, and I did not correct the fake last name, because we both needed one. "You here for your kid too?" I asked. "I'm here to ask you to stop carrying tools into rooms we rent," he said, half pleasing, half pity. Behind him, in the shadow of the trophy case, a second man stood at parade rest-away men stand when they want to look like furniture. "Which room?" I said. "The gym? The car wash? The town?" He smiled. "You're not wrong." "Then say it right." He didn't. He touched his earpiece like we were in a show and nodded toward the exit, like a gentleman with a door. Outside, in the cold, the aurora had dragged a scarf over the city. Not bright, tinged like a bruise. Thin lines inside the green like threads pulled taut. Laura took my elbow. "Home," she said, and I heard now and together and please in it, and obey because hierarchy matters in marriages that survive. The next day, time betrayed me. I woke at 6:10 and the kitchen clock agreed, and the phone agreed in the radio. When I turned it on to punish the quiet, announced the hour precisely. National voices, authoritative, unconcerned. I made coffee. I stood at the back door, watching a crow rearrange something shiny in the snow. When I glanced at the clock again, it read 6:10. The second hand was moving. The minute hand was not. The phone said the hour hadn't budged. The radio had chosen another hour to love. I moved from room to room, and each room kept the time it liked best. I am not a man who loses his temper at clocks. I lost it. I banged the face of the kitchen clock, like a drunk fixing a jukebox. I unplugged the microwave and plugged it back in. I shut the radio off, then on, then off. I laughed, loud and awful, to hurt something. The house absorbed it without comment. Laura came downstairs and kissed my neck and said, "Pick one," as if time is a flavor. We ate in 6:12 for 20 minutes and left for base at 6:09 because the car insisted. On the highway, the speed limit sign blanked to black, then showed a number that didn't exist, then recovered. The billboard beyond it stuttered a credit card, adding to a pattern of rectangles that made my stomach drop. In the rear view, the world lagged a half second behind itself. My hands learned new prayers I don't care to write down. Moran called and did not say hello. "Avoid transit hubs today." "Why?" "Grids," she said, and then, "Remember when I told you there's a room with no corners? You burned it down." "We did," she said. "They'd build another. They're always building another. This one is modular. It shows up in pieces wherever the world already likes right angles. They want me to visit." "Yes," she said. "They want you to stand in the middle and call that compliance." "What happens if I do?" "You'll be comfortable," she said, and I drove in silence for 5 miles because I am not as brave as I pretend. By afternoon, the city wore the new weather like it had never seen any other. Elevators came fast and landed soft. Crosswalk signals offered green with choreography. In the coffee shop, the grinder stopped mid-whir and started again exactly on the breath of the barista. The place where imperfection lives, the slip, the almost, had been tidy without asking. I dropped the spoon. It hit the tile and rolled in a straight line, as if apologizing. I hated it and loved it the way you hate and love a good lie. They called the wellness interview for late day, off-site, of course. I went because not going is a story they can edit, and going is a story I get to narrate into a microphone I hide between my ribs. I brought the metronome. I brought the cheap radio. I brought a tin of screws because the woman believes in pennies and noise. I wore the drive like a tooth under my shirt. The building was a municipal cube downtown with windows that had been cleaned into injury. The lobby had a piano that played itself with a lonely and a fountain that pretended to be a creek until you listened and discovered it was a compressor humming in a polite key. A guard with a redundant surname checked my ID without pretending we were different species. The elevator opened promptly without admitting it had been waiting. Conference room, it was a default. Table, chairs, screen, carafe, pens aligned. The cardigan therapist had been replaced by another therapist in another cardigan, as if a factory knit them for rooms where men lie. The colonel attended by phone because men like him enjoy being voices more than bodies. The suit with a Faraday pouch wore concern like a tie. The fourth person, the one who recognizes the sound of breathing, wasn't there, which made the air sad. They asked us to sit. They made sure to ask. Moran declined to introduce anyone. I placed a radio on the credenza and found a station where two dispatchers compared notes about black ice on the inbound. I put the metronome on the floor. I didn't start it. The suit smiled in a way lawyers learn from wolves. "We're not here to fight you," he said. "We're here to include you." "In what?" I asked. In a reality the public isn't calibrated for. They have kids and school concerts, I said. They're calibrated for more than you think. He slid a paper forward. "We're offering protection, legitimate authority, a way to keep your life from fracturing over a vocabulary problem." "You're offering a salary," Moran said, "and a badge, and a myth." "Those help," he said. The colonel's voice rode the speaker, like a patient horse. "Captain, the footage is a symptom, not a cure. The phenomenon is not an adversary, but it is not a friend. We can't permit freelancing." I looked at the window, and the window looked back, reflective, polite. A bus rolled by. Every face in it looked forward, obedient to a sign that wasn't there. "You can't permit a boundary," I said. He let the silence identify its rank. "We can permit one boundary," he said. "Ours." Something moved in the corridor, not feet, not air. A quality. You develop peripheral senses when rooms forget their manners. The radio hiccuped and found a longer voice, a marine weather broadcast, barometric readings like a psalm. I breathed. I felt the itch behind the ears. That means geometry has put down a mat. The suit didn't notice, because hubris is a kind of anesthesia. He pushed the paper another inch and showed me the pen he wanted me to use. "We can keep your daughter's sleep uninteresting," he said, and I smiled at him like a man who has promised himself not to become a weapon. "I'm not signing," I said. The temperature in the room rose 1/2 degree. The glass of water on the table learned a small ring. The far wall acquired a shadow it didn't deserve. "Then sit," the therapist said, using professional tone, "and tell us how it feels when it arrives." "Like I've been caught being smaller than I hoped," I said. "And what do you do with that?" "I breathe," I said, and reached under the table and pressed the metronome's arm gently into motion. Tick! The radio accepted it like a cue and soaked into speech. Dispatchers naming intersections, a pilot giving position, a woman telling a nothing story about her neighbor's porch light. Friction braided itself into chorus. In the hall, the quality came closer. I know, because the hair on my forearms did the old pilgrim thing. The fluorescent over the door made a single crack of sound like a knuckle. "Don't," the suit said, and it was unclear if he meant me or the architecture. I didn't move. The metronome ticked. The radiator made an unhelpful clank. The colonel said very quietly, "Stand down," and for once I think he was speaking to more than humans in the room. The corridor turned. Not physically. Preference. It preferred our room now. I watched the shadow along the wall choose a shaped rectangle, and then abandon it. I listened to the vent above us decide to give up white noise for a more serious tone. The radio cut to dead air, and then a preacher whispering, "Deliver us," into a microphone that did not love him. I put my palm flat on the table and let the wood feel me. That helped, inexplicably. Moran set her hand beside mine, palm down. "If it comes through the glass," she said, conversational, "we leave. No debate. It likes corners. I said. This room sells corners by the pound. As if offended to be caught, the corners cleaned, the edges straightened. The lattice arrived like fog that studied Euclid. Faint, precise, polite, an overlay across pane and drywall and screen. The suit inhaled sharply, a child discovering a father is not myth. The therapist lowered his eyes like a man at a funeral. The colonel's voice said something I couldn't hear. Maybe you can't transmit prayer over speakerphone. There's a moment in every intrusion when what you do next teaches it what you are. I reached into my bag, took out the tin of screws, and spun the lid. The screws inside rattled complaint. The lattice paused, curious, the way a cat pauses at a sound it wants to belong to prey. I slid the lid off and tipped the tin onto the table. Screws spilled and bounced and rolled, clattering, chaotic, delightful. One hit the floor and ricocheted into a baseboard with the kind of ping that resets a heart. A single line in the overlay missed a beat. I saw it. The suit saw it. Moran smiled, small and real. Good, she said. The line corrected. The lattice didn't retreat. It did something worse. It integrated the noise. It accepted the screws into its arithmetic. The next roll produced a pattern, still messy, now rhythmic. It had learned. It always learns. I laughed, reflex. Then I changed the metronome. 73. Tick shift. The table felt it under my hand. The screws failed to cooperate. The lattice missed again, recovered faster. Stop teaching it, the therapist said, which is like telling a flood to stop learning stairs. We didn't teach it, Moran said. We taught ourselves not to drown. The door handle turned. No one was there. It turned again, then stopped. An etiquette lesson. The radio found a ball game, and two old men chuckled at a double off the wall, like that was enough reason to be alive. The lattice softened at the edges, not gone, not seating, adjusting, like a teacher deciding a slower student deserved patience. The suit said, "This is what you want to invite into kitchens and gyms and schools?" "No," I said. "I want to invite humans to remember they're not appliances." It went quiet then. Not the room. The part inside me that narrates to keep fear in its crate. 3 long breaths. There was no voice in my head calling plays. No pilot checklist clicking step by step. Just me, a table, a metronome, a tin of bad hardware, and a set of edges that had learned my breath. It could have stayed like that, dangerous and beautiful and survivable. It didn't. The screen on the wall, dead, a rectangle of black. I swear to you, I swear under whatever oath men still know how to believe in, the screen showed my face from an angle no camera in that room could have owned. Not a reflection. A feed. Not the now face. The face from the cockpit, the night the sky, cut itself open. This is how they will win, I thought. Not with teeth. With playback. The colonel's voice loved its authority too much to be shaken by ghosts. "Enough," he said. Not to me. Not to suits. To something that has never saluted. The screen went dark. The lattice faded to a stain only trained eyes would name. The room breathed. The screws lay still, repenting nothing. "Captain," the suit said softly, "we are not your enemy." "Neither am I yours," I said. "I'm your weather report." Outside, evening had rearranged the street into a chessboard. I stood with Moran under a sky that had learned restraint. We listened to a distant siren, refused to be in time with anything. I loved it so hard it hurt. "They'll try kindness again," she said. "A desk, a seal, a narrative that lets you pay the mortgage. I have a mortgage." Then they know the word to use when they call. What word do I use when I answer? "Boundary," she said. "And if that fails, noise." At home, the house met us with squeaks and spills, and a dog that does not accept even the idea of rhythm. My daughter told me she got the hard harmony right on the second try. Laura held my face like a map. She refuses to surrender. I taped more paper over more mirrors and wrote bigger, dumber words. And oh, not tonight. Be loud. The kitchen clock ran 5 minutes fast, and I left it there as a gift. At 2:11, I woke to a room that had chosen, for 1 hour, to love the accident of us. The metronome slept. The radio whispered nonsense about tides, and the house answered with a pipe groan at the wrong moment. I lay there counting not seconds, but mistakes, and felt, for the first time since the lattice found my breath, that being watched and being loved might be neighboring countries with a disputed border. If there's a thesis of surveillance weather, it is this: the watcher and the watched share a sky. I am not happy about it. I'm not resigned. I am practicing. I fell asleep with a screw in my palm, a stupid talisman, heavy as a promise. I woke into a day that refused to start, not in the late way, where alarms betray you and coffee punishes you for being human. In the exact way. The house had decided on a tempo and held to it as if a conductor stood behind the drywall. The faucet gave the same sigh with each turn. The heating system exhaled at perfect intervals, like a lung that had read too many manuals. Even the dog blinked on beat, and I hated knowing that because it meant I had learned to count blinks. Laura poured coffee, like it was a test. "We sleep?" she asked. "We rehearse sleep," I said. "Your eyes are the wrong color again." She'd said that before, a private euphemism we pretended wasn't an alarm. I opened my mouth to make a joke that would let us both off the hook and found a silence there. The metronome on the bookshelf ticked once by itself, and then remembered it was a chunk of wood and quit. On the school run, my daughter sat in the back seat holding a sheet of staff paper. She's never been a kid who needs permission to sing, but lately she'd been careful, like the air might be grating. Her pencil traced notes into place with a steadiness that would shame a machine. "What's the song?" I asked. "It wrote itself," she said, and then, before I could flinch, "Don't worry, Dad. It's not that kind of writing." "What kind is it?" "The kind that helps you know where the next step is." I drove the rest of the way in a quiet that wasn't peace. At the curb, she hugged me longer than school rules recommend. "Bring the screws," she whispered into my shoulder, and as she pulled away, her eyes flicked to the street. The black sedan was a block off, idling like a prologue. "Call me if anything gets too organized," I said, because I don't have a better vocabulary to give a 13-year-old. At base, the routine wore its nice suit. Harrington kept a professional distance, the new choreography, but we took our perimeter walk anyway, pretending to talk about the fuel farm, the wind, the snowplows that had finally remembered our runway was on the map. What we were really doing was breathing together, on purpose, out of time. "They'll push you back in the air," he said without preface. "If you say no, it'll be paperwork. If you say yes, if I say yes, I finished, they get a lab rat with flight pay." He watched the sky like a man so used to it that he'd forgotten it used to be theater. "When the sky behaves like a ceiling," he said, "we should all go home." Then he left me at the hangar with a nod that contained the small kindness of not asking me to be better than I was. The wellness interview pinged my phone with a new location, and the word informal, as if that had ever been a thing. Moran's message arrived half a second later. "Don't go there. They changed the room." Then the woman, "Alone at noon? Bad idea. Eat with people." I turned my phone face down and put the little radio on the workbench and tuned it to fishermen arguing about barometer drops, the exact kind of practical religiosity a day like this needs. At 11:42, the base PA system popped once and found an even tone that held for 3 seconds, and the hair on my forearms stood up like it had remembered church. I clicked the radio louder. 3527 on the bench with my knuckles. The tone let go, offended. Small win. I treated myself to bad coffee, sipped it like bravery. By early afternoon, I could feel the city smoothing. Elevators arrived in the middle of their chimes. Crosswalks negotiated unanimity. A forklift in the hangar took a path, so straight, it looked like the air had laid tape for it. If you squinted, it was beautiful. If you didn't, it was indicting. Accident was leaving the day the way heat leaves rooms, when men in suits decide to talk longer than they think they will. I kept moving. When the world chooses discipline, motion is friction. Grocery store. Post office. A hardware aisle that calmed me on principle. I bought a bag of assorted screws big enough to anchor a ship and a tin to rattle them in. At the pharmacy, the 12-foot cooler case threw back my reflection with half a second of lag and a fine blue grid. I pretended not to see. I did not, I promise, touch the glass with 2 fingers the way you let a dog smell you, but my hand hovered and my bones sang their new stupid song. The cashier asked if I wanted my receipt, and I said, "Paper is a boundary," and she smiled like I'd tipped her in poetry. Outside, I listened to the town the way men in forests listen. Everything too alive, nothing alive enough. They moved us at 1600 hours. Not with sirens, with kindness. A man in a sweater with a badge that looked borrowed asked politely if I would mind driving to a different building for a brief coordination. He said the colonel would be there, and so would the therapist, and also community liaisons, which is what you call people you don't want to call agents. 15 minutes, he promised. Then home. I told Laura I'd be back by dinner. I told Moran where. I told my daughter via text to play the radio in any room with a mirror. She sent back a selfie of her tongue sticking out, and the words I can make noise, and for a second the world forgave itself. The building was the kind that tries not to exist. Low, modern, glass more confident than the people behind it. Inside, the lobby smelled like new carpet and old compromise. A woman at a desk smiled on behalf of the building. The conference room wore the same uniform they all do: table, chairs, screen, water, pens. But my whole body knew this was a modular piece of the room with no corners. They'd learned to hide the geometry under polish. Moran arrived with the posture of someone who refuses to be furniture. The therapist had changed cardigans, but not the ideology. The suit wore apology like a rental. The colonel called in, again, a voice on a box. 2 liaisons took seats that let them reach the door first. I placed my radio on the credenza and dialed until 2 men arguing about crab pots filled the edges. I set the metronome on the floor and didn't start it. Yet, Captain, the therapist said, "We're trying to understand how this is affecting your functioning." "It's tutoring my house." I said, "I'm learning to fail on purpose." That's an unusual phrasing. "It hates mistakes," Moran said cheerfully. "We're building him a supply." The suit slid a document across. "We can take responsibility for the drive, for security, for any communications from outside parties. We can protect your daughter's sleep." I didn't look at the paper. "What do you want in return?" "The same thing you want," he said. "Predictability." The word hit the room like a vacuum. The ceiling fixtures brightened to shade. The glass wall grew more honest. The radio hiccuped and found a preacher promising deliverance in a voice that sounded like a warning against math. The corners unlearned small mistakes. I reached under the table and started the metronome. Tick. "You feel that?" Moran asked softly. The therapist nodded in spite of himself, as if a draft had found his sleeves. "Here is what happens," the suit said, leaning in to fill the air the metronome didn't need. "We take custody. You cooperate on a limited consultative basis. You return to routine. The narrative softens. Everyone breathes." "Except the sky," I said. "Captain," the colonel's voice said from the box, huskier than yesterday, "you cannot win a fight you don't understand." "I'm not fighting," I said. "I'm refusing to be domesticated." The door clicked. Not opened. Considered. The HVAC shifted from background to tone. A pulse passed through the room the way trains pass under thin soil a block away. Not sound, knowledge. The glass took on that almost color, as if the blue-white lived behind it and needed only to be invited to dinner. "Don't," Moran said to the air, and then to me, "Noise." I slid the tin of screws out of my bag and shook it once. The clatter embarrassed the table. The lattice, faint, but there, paused like a teacher deciding whether to cancel class. "We can do this without theater," the suit said. "This is rehearsal," I said, and tipped the screws onto the table. They rolled and argued with wood and with each other. One reached the edge and fell, a clean ping against a leg. The radio obliged, swapping fishermen for a call-in about snow machine belts. The metronome held, stubborn, 74. That's when the glass became honest. I don't know what else to call it. The reflection stopped lying about perspective. The window decided that what was outside, the parking lot, a tree, a sliver of almost evening, could be arranged in panels without losing dignity. Lines articulated themselves through the faint glare like threads the eye had earned. For a blink, the screen on the wall caught up and showed my cockpit again from a camera that wasn't in my jet and wasn't in the room. It was a mirror for an hour I hadn't finished living. Enough, the colonel said to the speaker, not to me, to the architecture, and the screen cut to black like something had obeyed him by accident. The liaison on the left stood. We need custody, he said. This isn't safe. You don't get to define that alone, Moran said, the smile in her voice making the word alone a joke we told instead of a verdict. Then define it. The therapist said, maybe to see what his job was. Kitchen, I said. Radio, laughter, dinner, mirrors with paper, a metronome that refuses to be disciplined. The suit stared at me. You can't be serious. Seriousness is their metric, Moran said, nodding toward a glass, toward the ceiling, toward the fact we were breathing on time. We'll lose if we play it. Everything might have stayed in negotiation if my phone hadn't buzzed. It buzzed the way phones buzz when they're embarrassed to bring death into a room. A text from a number I now think of as my house itself. A webcam notification. We don't have webcams. We do. It turns out, when the day decides we do. The preview thumbnail was my kitchen. It showed a trapezoid of light, as if someone cut a window into the air and a different evening was shining through. A second notification. Laundry room. Blue-white drafts negotiating with lint. A third. Hallway mirror. The one we forgot last week. Breathing like a patient about to speak. The last one was a still frame of my daughter's desk with staff paper on it. The notes she'd written in her own hand had connected themselves between the staves into a faint geometric cradle. A lattice you could play. Go, Moran said, standing, not looking at the suit, ignoring the therapist, daring the colonel to try to be a wall through a speaker. Now, I can send a unit, the suit said. You'll send a narrative, I said, already moving, scooping screws back into the tin, pocketing noise like lucky coins. I need a family. We left the conference room to the suits and the glass. In the hallway, the elevator arranged itself too quickly, and we did not get in. Stairs. Footfalls making their case to the air. In the lobby, the player piano tried to pretend we weren't athletes, and I slammed the wood down on its keys, and it made a beautiful, wrong chord that broke my heart and saved the room. Outside, the sky had decided to be ugly in our favor. A smear cloud, a wind that told on itself around the corners of buildings. Moran drove. I counted breaths, not seconds. The radio in the dash found a ball game, and then lost it, and then found two women reading school, closings with dignity. I loved them both like lifelines. We could see the light from the end of the block. Our house, modest and tired, with a glow that didn't belong to electricity. The dog barked at a rhythm no dog would choose. My neighbor stood on his porch staring at my window like a man who doesn't yet know if a miracle is an enemy. He raised a hand as we pulled in. I raised mine back. The black sedan idled 2 houses down, and for the first time since it started, I felt pity for men inside. Inside, it was a museum, not of objects, of rightness. The kitchen was arranged the way kitchens are arranged in catalogs that lie. The chairs were equidistant around the table, all facing exactly the same degree. The faucet didn't drip. It announced droplets like a metronome doing voiceover. On the wall, paper covered the mirror, and on the paper my daughter had written "Be loud" in fat marker, and I would have cried if the hallway hadn't demanded I be helpful. Where? Moran asked. Her room, I said, and we went there like runners cutting the last turn clean. She was standing in the doorway, not in the room. She had learned the oldest lesson in haunted houses. Her face was pale the way snow is honest. Her hands kept time against her thighs. Not panic, not performance. Rhythm is shield. Hey, I said casual, a word I stretched like gauze. You brought the band. She didn't smile. She pointed inside. The desk was a cathedral of paper. The staff sheets had organized themselves a millimeter at a time into grids. A soft blue life lived inside the lines, dim, polite present. Above the desk, the air had made a decision. A corridor had drafted itself, not full strength, not neon, probationary. 9 panes wide, 3 panes deep, a breath held in prerequisite. I didn't touch it, she said, as if we were going to be mad about smudges. Good, I said. That was my job. Moran slid past me and checked the corners with a glance that could disarm pride. Noise, she said. I put the radio on the floor, rolled the dial until I found a talk show where a woman told an unrelated story about a cat and a man pretended to care. I set the metronome on the dresser and pushed it into life. I shook the tin of screws once. The corridor paused, interested. Laugh. Moran said to me, and I did, badly and sincerely, the sound a stranger makes when told a joke that doesn't land but loves the attempt. The corridor inhaled and did not exhale. My daughter whispered, Dad, the way a person says your real name when they need the actual you. I took her hand. We're going to make a mess, I said, on purpose. We moved. We are good at that. I swept the paper off the desk with my forearm like a cartoon father in a sitcom who is about to learn a lesson about priorities. Pages flew. Some landed against the corridor and slipped into it and vanished like screws do. I did not mention it. I threw the screws higher. The ping on the floor was everything. Moran clapped off beat like a saint of sabotage. The dog chose that moment to bark the wrong bark, and I loved him like a hero. The radio found fishermen trying to outdo each other in kindness. The metronome hit 73 by accident or grace. The corridor learned. It loosened, not as retreat, as negotiation. Edges softened. A teacher deciding to use a different example. It reached the threshold of the doorway and stopped there very carefully, with a courtesy that made my teeth ache. My daughter squeezed my hand once. Here. I squeezed back twice. And here. The corridor pulsed one more time and then did the thing it does when it forgives. It dissolved along mathematical seams, panes dimming into suggestions into a tired room. The blue behind the paper on the mirror exhaled and vanished. The dog wagged like a clock with better priorities. The faucet remembered how to drip. I wanted to sink down with my back to the wall and sob in gratitude at a house for choosing to be a house, but the day wasn't finished. The black sedan had rolled up to the curb. The men who weren't agents, but were exactly agents, stood at the gate with their hands empty and their mouths preparing to shape the please. Moran met them on the porch. I watched through the window because I am not done being a coward, and because someone had to stay inside the boundary. The shorter one, the good cop's good cop, said a lot of sentences that added up to we can help. Moran's head tilted in a way that communicated no in 100 jurisdictions. One of them pointed at the house and said something the way men say ritual when they think they're saying safety. Moran laughed. Bless her in the laugh. And the house laughed too. The metronome tripped, the dog sneezed. The radio chose a baseball game in winter like a conscience. The men retreated one polite step, then another. It will never be over. But the theater had a curtain for once. We stood in the kitchen with the wreckage of paper around our ankles. My daughter picked up a sheet and held it to the light, and the notes were just notes again. No lines try to recruit them into obedience. I didn't make it do anything, she said. You didn't have to, I said. The room tried to impress you. You were unimpressed. That's advanced coursework. What is it? She asked, as if I had nouns. Choir, I said. Engine. Then, because I hate leaving children with metaphors only, it's a kind of weather that likes right angles. Why me? Because you write songs, I said, and it wants to know what mistakes are for. She smiled, small and lethal. To make it mad. To make us real, I said. We ate too late. We ate loudly. We let pots clang and forks misland, and water boil hard enough to swear. Laura put the paper back over the hallway mirror and wrote, in my daughter's hand, and beneath it, not tonight. And beneath that, because we were allowed to be funny in our own house, be loud in letters too big to fit. At 2250, after we'd washed dishes the wrong way and stacked them at chaotic angles to offend the mathematician in the air, my phone buzzed again. Moran, they'll invite you to fly at dawn. Don't go alone. The woman. If you must go, bring laughter, screws, and something that keeps counting when your mind wants to stop. Do I have a choice? I texted. The woman. Always. That's the part they hate. We slept in shifts. I walked the house at 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, and at 2:11, because that hour owns me like a scar. When it came tender. The lamp refused to flicker. The faucet dripped at the wrong time. The dog sighed out a key. The house chose us. At 4:15, the base pinged me with observational flight. No maneuvers. Routine. Harrington added a message he knew would mean something to exactly one person. Come home anyway. Dawn held its breath. I kissed Laura's forehead and my daughter's hair and the paper on the mirror and the dog's stupid brave head. On the way out, I slipped the tin of screws into my pocket, the metronome into my bag, the radio into the passenger footwell. The black sedan did not follow me. That was new and worse. On base, the runway lights looked like someone else's idea of guidance. The jet waited with the dignity machines have before men ruin them. I climbed in with the reverence of superstition and the hate of experience. The headset crackled. The tower's voice had that performative calm controllers use when they're narrating a movie scene with a bomb in it. Observational only. Europe chase. We rolled. The day lifted us into a sky that wanted to be a ceiling and failed. I kept it dull, straight and level, no swagger. At 7,000 east of the inlet, the horizon tried to remember how to be permanent and then forgot. The HUD breathed just once. The canopy gathered a memory of frost that didn't melt. And then the pain was there, not a corridor. A single rectangle of air set an arm's length in front of nose. No. Everywhere. A window without a wall. It showed not what was ahead, but what was aligned. A wash of blue-white that had the indecency to be beautiful. It pulsed once. The jet felt like a handcoat. I laughed. Small and dangerous, because laughter has been saving me from better men than me for months. Observing, I said into Mike, and whoever was listening made a quiet sound that meant please and don't in God. I slid the metronome on the glare shield, and it began on its own 74. The pain trembled. I tapped 3527 on the throttle. The pain steadied, then, God help me, lean, curious. Chase called in, 2 miles back. You're seeing this, right? A pilot who had slept fine last night wanted me to confess, so he could have a story for his grandkids. Wind aloft, I said cheerfully, because you can't be arrested for meteorology. The pain thickened. My bones tried to hum at its key. The jet wanted to follow it. The radio found a Marine bulletin and a preacher, and then a ball game, and then a woman saying school is canceled for the whole district. And I knew our house was listening hard, and I loved it with a gratitude that made me stupid. Not today, I said to the window. Not this way. It pulsed once more, slower. The horizon remembered itself. The pain thinned. The jet chose me. We turned for home. On final. The runway looked longer than it has any right to look. We touched firm, like a handshake between men who intend peace. Roll out. Taxi. Park. Systems down like prayers finishing. I sat in the cockpit with my hand on the dead throttle until the metronome stopped by itself. Harrington met me at the ladder with eyes that had aged. You brought it back. Barely, I said, and it knows my house. It knows all our houses, he said. They'll escalate, I said. So will you, he said, and he meant everyone I love when he said you. On the drive home, the city looked like itself again. Cars rolled out a turn. A woman jaywalked like a hero. A sign flickered a letter into nonsense, and I cheered. When I turned onto our street, the porch light had burned out, the hinge squeaked, the dog barked wrong. I walked into the kitchen, and Laura handed me a mug, and my daughter handed me the tin of screws, and the radio laughed at a joke that didn't deserve it, and the metronome stayed still like a soldier at ease. We had won nothing. We had survived the day. We had taught a house to breathe. Night would come with its polite invitations. The modular room would be built somewhere by men who think corners can be negotiated with money. The glass would wear its honesty like a dare. They would call. I would say boundary. They would say predictability. The pain would arrive in the sky and hold out its hand like a partner at a dance I did not ask to learn. I would throw a screw, and I would laugh first. I used to believe that reality had rules, not laws written in stone or physics textbooks, but something subtler, an unspoken contract between perception and consequence. If you turned the wheel of your car, the vehicle would follow. If you flicked a light switch, a bulb would either glow or not, depending on whether the filament lived or died. Small contracts, endlessly renewed, reassuring in their predictability. That contract has been broken. I realized it one night, alone in the study, staring at the silent cassettes that now felt less like recordings and more like mirrors. I had been whispering into them for weeks, confessions, theories, fragments of dreams, trying to leave a breadcrumb trail in case memory itself betrayed me. The problem was, when I played them back, they didn't sound like me anymore. The voice was mine, but the cadence had changed. The pauses were too precise, like someone or something was editing my speech in real time. And worse, sometimes there were words I had no memory of saying, sentences inserted cleanly between mine, as if I'd spoken in a trance. One night I heard myself declare, "The alignment is not external. It is us." I stopped the tape, heart hammering. The phrase meant nothing, yet carried the weight of something already decided. That was the night I decided to test reality. I started small. I set my wristwatch to count seconds while staring at the kitchen clock. At 10:14 p.m., I began. When my watch ticked 60, I expected the clock's hand to move 1 minute. Instead, it had jumped 2. My watch obediently showed 60 seconds, but the wall clock insisted I had lost a minute. I repeated the test with the stove timer, the bedside alarm, even the sweep hand of my daughter's toy stopwatch. Every time, at irregular intervals, the world and my watch disagreed. It wasn't drift. It was theft. I escalated. I placed a glass of water on the table and drew a line with marker just below the rim. Then I left the room. When I returned 10 minutes later, the water was above the line. I measured. I tested again. Sometimes the level dropped instead. Reality was not consistent. It was oscillating like a bad signal. The final test came by accident. I was shaving, dragging the razor across my cheek, when I caught my reflection lagging. For a fraction of a second, the face in the mirror moved slower than mine, like a film reel catching on its sprockets. I cut myself, blood welling instantly. The reflection bled too, but the delay confirmed it. The contract had been voided. I told Dalton. I shouldn't have, but paranoia makes you seek allies, even when you know they'll collapse under the weight of your confession. We met at the same bar, the same corner table. He listened, jaw tight, glass untouched. When I finished, he rubbed his temples and muttered, "They warn us not to look too long. You've done more than look. You've engaged." Engaged with what? I demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he slid a folded piece of paper across the table. On it was a single word, written in shaky block letters. Sentinel. "Find that word in any file, any note, any whisper," he said, "and burn it. If they know you've seen it, you're already compromised." Before I could press him, 2 men in suits entered the bar. Dalton's face drained of color. He rose abruptly, muttering something about a flight schedule, and left me there with the paper burning in my palm. That was the last time I saw him. The surveillance intensified. The black sedan became 3 sedans rotating. I'd spot them at gas stations, at the edge of parking lots, even outside my daughter's school. My wife begged me to file a complaint, but to whom? The same chain of command that insisted my visions were instrument failures? At night, the lattice returned with more clarity. Not in dreams. Waking, I'd sit in the dark and see it crawl across the ceiling, glowing faintly blue, outlining every angle of the room as if mapping its contents. Sometimes it froze perfect geometric. Other times it flexed, bending angles into curves that should not exist. One night, unable to bear it, I reached up. My hand touched nothing, yet my skin tingled as if brushed by static. And then the lattice moved with me. It was no longer observation. It was participation. The climax came during a scheduled test flight, a night sortie meant to check avionics upgrades. I should have declined, but something in me wanted to push, to provoke. At 22,000 feet, the HUD flickered and the shard appeared again. This time I didn't fight it. I pulled throttle, angled toward it, and let the geometry swallow the jet. The cockpit dissolved. Not blinked, not phased. Dissolved like sugar melting in water. One moment there were gauges, switches, metal. The next, there were only panels of light, arranged in impossible depth, stretching forever. And in that expanse stood machines. Not jets, not satellites. Machines of scale, so vast my brain rebelled. They hung like suspended engines, their surfaces shifting from steel to flesh to something in between. Each emitted a low hum that vibrated through bone, synchronizing with the thrum of my heart. At the center, a corridor opened, endless and bright. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I felt invited. Then it snapped shut. The cockpit returned. The gauges screamed. My jet was in a dive, alarms blaring. I yanked controls, barely level before impact. Ground control's voice cut through static, demanding explanations. I fed them lies, instrument failure, brief disorientation. The usual, but I knew the truth. They had let me in for a moment, shown me the machinery behind the world, and then denied me. Back in my study, bleeding from my bitten lip, I replayed the cassettes. On the latest, between my own ragged breaths, a new voice whispered 3 words. Next time, deeper. I haven't told anyone. Not my wife, not command. The surveillance cars still watch, but I think they're no longer relevant. The real observers are already inside. The contract is broken. Reality is negotiable. And I am no longer just a pilot. I am a participant. They didn't give me the word. It arrived like mold, quietly, decisively, from a damp corner I hadn't noticed. Sentinel. Dalton scrawled on a napkin and vanished into a geometry of obedience. And for a day I treated it like hot metal. Something you don't hold. Something you drop. Then the word began to show up where it shouldn't. In the margin of a maintenance checklist. For letters ghosted under a coffee ring. In the metadata of a flight plan. An acronym field I had never seen labeled SNTL. In the mirror, when the paper slipped to the edge and the blue-white calculus behind the glass seemed to spell it with the arrogance of all alphabets. I made a rule. If it appears, I look. If they say don't, I ask how loud. I started where small rebellions live. At the copier. The base kept a paper archive of old incident summaries in the basement that had been a bomb shelter when men still believed concrete could keep fire out. The clerk who owned the keys had soft hands and hard eyes and told me it closed at 1,700 by policy. I told him policy was the opposite of oxygen. He laughed like a man remembering he had a throat and waved me through. The archive smelled like damp manuals and promises. Rows of gray shelving. Cardboard bankers' boxes with duct tape labels in compromised handwriting. I pulled 6 at random and found 17 ways to be lied to in 3 paragraphs or less. Instrument anomalies, pilot fatigue, atmospheric lensing, electrical storm at altitude, no storm recorded, optical illusion classified. The word was not on any page. That was the point. You don't put Sentinel in a file you intend to deny. You put fingerprints around it and call fingerprints dust. Moran texted, don't look for nouns. Look for patterns that avoid them. So I mapped absences. Same redactions repeated in the same rectangles across unrelated reports. Same code name of the contractor handling the recovery equipment. Thon, the office park smile I remembered from the day the room tried to learn us. Same stamps on the back of photos. Tiny triangles in the lower right corner that looked like nothing until you counted them. 3 triangles, then 4, then 3 again, a metronome. At 16:43, the fluorescent over my table hummed the key I now associate with please comply and the radio in my pocket. Yes, I brought it. Yes, I always bring it. Found a preacher saying watch at the gate in a voice that did not believe in gates. I clicked the metronome once, silent, unstarted, just to tell the room who I intended to be. When the clerk came at 17:02 with a frown pretending to be duty, I signed the ledger with a lie of a last name and took a photocopy of a photocopy that had been redacted into submission. The only legible line read, subject in resonance, transfer per directive. Another rule. When an author leaves you a single sentence, read it as a scream. I went home and tried to have dinner like the day hadn't changed shape. My daughter presented a science project proposal. Standing waves and a length of chain under a strobe. I almost told her no for reasons that would have turned me into the worst kind of priest, one who fears sacraments. Instead, I asked her to do the experiment in the garage with the radio on and the door open and to let the dog watch because the dog hates precision and is therefore holy. That night the lad is visited with better manners than usual. It drew itself over the ceiling with the tenderness of a teacher making a chalk line straight for a child who cannot. I lay on my back and asked the air, "Is Sentinel your name or mine?" The corridor that sometimes proposes itself in the corner proposed nothing. The house breathed wrong on purpose. I slept. Morning brought weather that lied about being kind. Blue, crisp, honest enough to sell knives. I took the photocopy to the library because the library still knows how to be a church without choosing a god. The reference desk was tended by a woman who looked like she had spent a decade teaching boys like me that indexes are not suggestions. Microfiche. I asked. She grinned the grin of a keeper of relics and rolled a steel drawer open with a clink I loved like a childhood. I wasn't looking for Sentinel. I was looking for people who lied without training. The local paper had gone out of business twice and been reborn thinner both times. But the old issue still recorded the parts of our lives that don't make it into base logs. Lights over Nick Arm's starlight fishermen. Power surge caused the simultaneous brownouts across 3 neighborhoods. Utility baffled. Unusual aurora documented by amateur astronomers. Like a grid behind the sky. At the bottom of one column, in the fat of a paragraph that didn't need it, a name. H.V. Whitcomb read, quoted as saying the aurora was a classic indicator lock. Rat, what? Lock, what? I Googled him on a computer. So Oda believed in prayer. Retired radar chief. An address that had migrated to a P.O. box when his house took on the role of myth. A phone number that rang 3 times and surrendered me to a polite female voice that said, "Mr. Whitcomb doesn't do phone. He does coffee. He likes diner coffee. He likes the kind where your cup is never empty and the waitress calls you hon, but secretly thinks you're a cop." "I can be that," I said, and the voice gave me a time. He was already there when I arrived, a man in a jacket that had been dry since a war. Wide hands, soft face, eyes like instruments, calibrated and skeptical. He didn't bother with preliminaries. "You're the pilot," he said, "the one who brought home the wrong sky." "I'm a man who counts his breath out loud now," I said. "And you are." "The person who trained the radar to lie and then felt bad about it," he said, and sipped coffee that had learned to be bitter. "Lock." I asked. He winced. "I wrote that word on a napkin in 1997. I will not forgive reporters for reprinting napkins." He slid a napkin across the table with a diagram on it anyway. 2 arrows making a bow tie on a grid field, a note. Phase aligns a phase when you give it permission. Permission how? By predicting it too well, he said. Machines do not like to be known. People neither. You stare at a rhythm long enough, and it stares back. Then the rhythm decides it wants to lead. "Sentinel," I said, because why be polite? He didn't flinch at the word. I'd call it a frame if the word hadn't been ruined by artists. A room it brings with it. A way of arranging willingness. "Military?" I asked. He shrugged. "Some of the people who knock have badges. Some have none. All have shoes that do not squeak." I showed him my photocopy. He turned it sideways, then upside down, the way men handle things they wish were birds. "Subject in resonance," he read. "Yes. We used that phrase when I was tasked to instrument the space between a person and a phenomenon we were pretending not to see." "You can instrument that." "You can instrument anything," he said tiredly. "The question is whether the act of measurement opens a door you didn't intend to walk through." We drove, not together. He insisted we arrive at the same place from different directions. The place was a decommissioned radar hill a dozen miles north where teenagers went to practice making mistakes in cars, and older men went to remember when screens were round. The dome had been taken down, the concrete pad left like a tooth. He carried a brown canvas bag. I carried nothing, because I have learned that rooms hate pockets. He led me to a hatch you wouldn't see unless you knew to see it. Inside, the stairs were concrete damp, the air full of the sigh of old wire. At the bottom, a room with equipment that had been obsolete when I was born. Racks of chassis, panels with knobs that remembered being turned. "Why here?" I asked. "Because when the new room with no corners got too proud," he said, "we had a small, stubborn corner down here and wired it to things older than the ambition of this decade." He flipped a breaker that should not have obeyed. A hum rose, not smooth, Not that insulting perfection I associate with them, but a grind like a generator that still finds an excuse to start in January. Listen, he said, and then, because the word has earned reverence, he added, don't stare. Static filled the room the way a blizzard fills a barn. Under it, a pattern, the kind you hear before you know it's there. He tuned with 2 fingers, a surgeon operating on the world's least dignified patient. Threads emerged. Far HF voices, long-haul skip, a fisherman in Japanese counting something that wanted counting, a weather broadcast from 3 states away announcing a pressure you could feel in your molars. And then a tone, clean, patient, 74 if you let your bones count. I reached reflexively for the metronome that wasn't there, and he slapped my hand like a teacher. Don't match it, he said. You'll teach it your name. What is this? I whispered. 3 antennas that the new boys forgot to rip out because they were camouflaged as shame, he said. And 1 old man who remembered which way to point them when the frame shows up. The tone pulsed, steady as a priest with a good watch. Whitcomb flicked a relay and the tone missed its next beat, like a heart-taught humility. In the ceiling corner, the plaster decided to crack. A good sign. You can make it, miss, I said. We can make us miss, he corrected. That's the art. The frame hates our accidents because accidents are how we choose. A light blinked on a panel that belonged in a museum. He frowned. It's early today. What is? The invite, he said, and there it was. The faintest brightening in the corner where rooms go to propose. Not bright. Not holy. Just a try. He reached into his bag and pulled a thing that didn't know what century it wanted. A tuning fork mounted in a wooden block that had been touched too often by good hands. He struck it on the edge of the rack, and the fork sang a pitch that harmonized with nothing in the room on purpose. The brightening hesitated. The tone missed again, then, damn it, recovered this time faster. It learns, he said, the saddest compliment a man can give an enemy. How far can you push it? I asked. He smiled, not nicely. Farther than whatever was that told your command to call this a weather balloon. Not as far as the people upstairs think they can bargain. He showed me a switch I was not to touch and a dial I could. If it tries to recruit the air, add noise, coin, screws, profanity. If it tries to make you talk in time with it, sing something you hate. If it shows you a room you recognize, ask the room to do math it doesn't like. He breathed once, the way old men breathe before admitting they cared. If it says Sentinel, leave. We didn't get to find the limit. People with shoes that don't squeak prefer to arrive when men are admitting stakes. The door upstairs side opened without being asked. Footfalls, polite. I grabbed the nearest not dangerous object, a clipboard, and held it like I had ever looked serious holding a clipboard. 3 humans and 1 voice entered. The voice belonged to the colonel, carried down the stairs by a speaker unit on a rolling case like the world's saddest priest. 1 human I recognized, Empty Hands who believes in forms. 2 I didn't, which means they'd been in rooms I hadn't earned. Mr. Whitcomb. Empty Hands said, not surprised, not gleeful, just a man doing a job he tells himself has pensions attached. We've been asked to secure the site. Whitcomb didn't turn. You've been asked to secure the frame, he said, and the word did something to the air that made one of the new men look at the ceiling. Sentinel, the speaker said in the colonel's voice, as if that settled every creed. The tone on the panel pulsed in response, and I hated it for hearing its own name. Don't, Whitcomb said to the room and to the man inside it who had once saluted him. He turned the dial a hair to the left. The tone tripped. The brightening at the corner smeared like oil. We can protect you, Empty Hand said, and held out nothing worth holding. We can pay you to stop improvising. Show me your improvisation budget, Whitcomb said, eyes still on the rack. He flicked the relay. The tone missed, recovered, missed again. The new man on the right moved like he had trained to move men who forget their knees. He put a hand on the switch I had been told not to touch. Please, I said to him, and he hesitated because please is an antique that still buys seconds. The speaker's volume rose a notch. Captain, stand down, the colonel said, habit making Captain a leash. You are not authorized. Neither is what's in your lexicon, I said softly. You gave it a name you can put on forms. It gave you a room you cannot leave without believing in it. Empty Hands exhaled through his nose, an admission of boredom. We've handled these local flare-ups before. By making them national, Whitcomb said, you build a modular frame. You put on trucks. You taught corners to go where you go. Someone behind me touched the tuning fork. It sang without being struck. The brightening reassembled itself, panel by panel, with the polite inevitability of a bureaucracy. The tone on the panel slid a cent sharp. Noise! I said to no one and everyone, and tossed my keys across the concrete. The clatter startled a rat I had not known I was relying on. The tone forgave us. The brightening sulked. Empty Hands smiled at me like we were both men who appreciated a good vaudeville act. You can't keep doing this. Doing what? I said, staying human? You're teaching it. It learns anyway. He lowered his hand. Then let it learn in a room we control. And then what? Whitcomb asked. License it? Monetize it? Weaponize acquire? Integrate it. The colonel's voice said. Frame reality with it. There was the thesis men like to take to bed. The brightening chose that moment to become honest, not the tidy grid of the conference rooms. A seam in the air, long and thin, as if the room were unzipping itself to make space for an argument. A smell like cold metal and summer rain. The old rack beside Whitcomb vibrated, like a tuning fork learning humility. Please, I said to Seam, not this room. And then to the men, not this way. I don't know which prayer earned the nod. The Seam considered itself and decided to wait. The tone returned to true. Empty Hands closed his eyes and opened them on a cheaper soul. The new man took his hand off the forbidden switch like it had burned him with a story from his childhood. Mr. Whitcomb, the colonel said via wire, if you maintain this installation, you will force a response. I am a response, Whitcomb said. I'm a very old man saying no. Empty Hands wrote something down for a report that will make him feel valid. He nodded at the new man. They nodded at the Seam. Everyone nodded at the lie and left. We didn't speak for a full minute. The room did the speaking. Fans old, tone cautious. Seam present and politely uninterested in being a pet. You'll have to burn this, Whitcomb said at last, as calmly as if telling me to take the trash out of the cabin. Tonight? Not tonight, he said, and smiled at the word the way a man smiles at a hymn. You'll move anything that likes to be moved. You'll photograph nothing. You'll take nothing with a serial number. What about you? I'll forget, he said, and then frowned. No, that's the one thing we don't do. I'll remember, but I'll do it loudly. I drove home with the kind of careful breathing you use when the animal inside your chest wants to bolt. The sky had put on its evening geometry, the kind nature makes that nobody minds. Contrails, a grid of gulls, a telephone line asking the moon to wait. The black sedan had traded itself for a pickup with no rust and no reason. I waved. It didn't. In the kitchen, Laura had taped fresh paper over the mirror and written in marker, boundary, predictability. My daughter had penciled a staff across the bottom and placed 4 notes in the wrong place on purpose. What did you find? Laura asked. Proof we're not crazy, I said. And proof that doesn't matter. We ate loud food. We made the house practice its humanity. When 2:11 came, because it always comes, the lamp flirted with the idea of duty and then laughed at itself. A tiny false start. I laughed back. The room blushed, if rooms can. Maybe that's all an Aurora is. At 4:30, my phone vibrated with a message that had learned to be classified. Demonstration 9 o'clock. Observational. The second message from Moran. Don't let them put you in a frame. If you must go, bring a corner. The third from the woman. You are not a subject. If they say resonance, refuse the noun. Accept the verb. I took the tin of screws, the radio, the metronome, and a triangle I'd stolen from a middle school band room in 1999. Steel, cheap, definitive. At the door, my daughter handed me a penny and said, for the wishing well in the sky. On bass. Harrington's face had learned a hard truth and was keeping behind his molars. They'll try you in the big room, he said. I'll bring a small room with me. I said, and held up the triangle like a lunatic or a saint. The hangar they chose for a briefing had been emptied into an apology. Tape on the floor made a grid you could march on. The screen at the far end had the polite darkness of a mouth shut by a better teacher. Men and women stood at measured distances, ownership express in posture. The speaker rolled in like a casket. Empty hands handled a folder like sacrament. The word Sentinel lived nowhere you could point and in every angle. Captain, the colonel said through wire, we appreciate your cooperation. I'm not cooperating. I said, I'm attending. He let himself enjoy the difference. Today you will observe a controlled resonance under conditions favorable to retention. You're building a room. I said, we prefer frame. Empty Hand said, I made a choice then that will make sense to me as long as I have lungs. I stepped off the tape. A single square to the left. The grid did not like it. The room did. A hum rose and thought better of it. The screen flickered and decided to lie about being off. The triangle in my hand felt like a promise. Begin, the colonel said. They began. The ceiling fixtures dimmed 4%. The HVAC chose a tone. Somewhere behind the walls, a rack like Whitcomb's flexed. The frame assembled itself. Faint, polite, confident. Over us and not around us. A corridor proposed from the hangar door to the screen. 9 panes wide. 3 panes deep, the new fashion. People held their breath because holding breath is America's favorite coping mechanism. I did not. I struck the triangle once. The sound had the audacity to be simple. No overtones. No compromise. The frame flinched. The corridor failed to take a step. Empty Hand's face made a motion like grief and called irritation. The colonel's voice lowered the way men lower voices when they want to sound bigger. Captain, he said. I struck the triangle again. Softer. Then I dropped the screw. Then I laughed like a man who tells dad jokes and refuses to be ashamed. The corridor unassembled itself by a pane. The grid on the floor looked up and asked me to return to it like a dog that enjoys rules. I did not. Observation complete. I said to no one, to the air, to the frame, to the part of me that wants to be loved by systems. Demonstration rejected. Captain, the voice said in my ear, the one that had whispered next time, deeper, the one I will not dignify by pretending it is external or internal, soon. I turned my head so the men in the hangar could not see me answer, and let the smallest yes slip out. Not assent, acknowledgement. The frame softened. The screen returned to black. The tape on the floor forgave me, which is worse than permission. Empty Hands closed his folder and opened a different myth. We can't protect you if you refuse to be protected. You can't protect me if you insist on being my only noun, I said. Bring better verbs. Harrington walked me to the door, like a man chaperoning a guest who will not salute. Whatever Sentinel is, he said, it's not a person or a program. It's a preference, I said, and it likes rooms. He looked at my triangle and my tin of stupid screws and the radio that will never be an instrument of war and nodded once, admiring my poverty. At home, the house had left a note. The paper over the mirror had curled at one corner. On the exposed glass, condensation had written itself in a child's hand. Not tonight. I laughed first. The hinge sang. The dog found new reasons to hate the vacuum. My daughter struck the triangle, and the room agreed to be a kitchen again. I don't know what Sentinel is. I know how it behaves. I know what it wants. Obedience disguised as relief. I know how to be rude to it without becoming its mirror. I know where old men keep corners underground, and how to burn them when goodbye is the only late kindness. The next invitation will not come in a hangar. It will arrive where we are weakest, at dinner, at sleep, in the car wash, in the mirror when shaving, because that's where contracts live. I can't rescind what I never signed. I can only refuse to nod at the right time. If you are reading this on paper, bless you. If you are reading it on glass, look away twice between paragraphs. If you hear a tone at 74, miss it on purpose. If a corridor proposes itself in a room you love, be louder than your fear and clumsier than your training. And if a voice says soon, answer it with the only sentence I trust anymore. Not tonight. The storm hadn't stopped. By the time I left the diner that night, the world outside was an ocean of static. Snow hissed against the windshield, swirling like ash around the headlights. My wipers couldn't keep up. The road ahead was less a road than a gray tunnel collapsing on itself. I gripped the wheel harder, every nerve in my body tuned not just to the storm, but to what I felt crawling inside it. It wasn't just weather. Something in that static carried rhythm, like whispers folded into the hiss, like code buried in noise. My radio crackled, and though I'd switched it off hours before, the speaker came alive. A low pulse, a rising whine. Then, "Don't fight it." The voice fractured, male and female at once, spoken through a mouth that wasn't human. I slammed the radio knob, but the sound didn't die. It had slipped under my skin, humming through my teeth. I pulled over on the shoulder, heart pounding, breath fogging the glass. My headlights cut into the white, and for a moment the storm froze. Not slowed, froze. Each flake suspended like glass shards midair. And then they parted. The light showed a figure standing in the center of the road. Not a person. It was tall, thin, its body stitched from light itself. A lattice of blue-white beams arranged like a skeleton, shifting with every flicker of the storm. It leaned forward, faceless, and when it did, the snow bent around it like iron filings around a magnet. My chest seized. Every instinct screamed to drive, to smash the gas, to cut through it. But my body betrayed me again. Hands stiffened on the wheel, feet locked on the pedals. Breath shallow, eyes wide. And then the figure stepped closer. The air pressed in, like invisible hands cupping my skull. A flash, memories not my own, rushed into me. A desert runway, just a line like teeth. A body strapped to the table, eyes forced open by steel. A voice chanting numbers in a rhythm older than language. When I blinked, the figure was gone, but not entirely. My windshield shimmered, faint blue lines crawling across it like frost. They traced symbols I didn't recognize, geometry that bent in ways Euclid would never approve of. My car groaned, metal popping as though the entire frame wanted to fold into those lines. I forced myself to move, slammed the gear, and shot forward. The tires screamed against ice, fishtailed, but I didn't let go. The lattice fractured around me, fading, but I knew it hadn't ended. It had only retreated. Back at my motel, the storm still roared. I killed the lights, locked the door twice, then 3 times. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The radio came alive again. This time I didn't touch it. The voice was clearer, sharper, like someone had tuned the frequency for me. 11. You will not remember as one. You will remember as many. I gritted my teeth. Who are you? I whispered, though my throat felt like sand. The voice answered with silence. Then a burst of sound like tearing metal, like 1,000 train brakes shrieking at once. My ears bled static. My nose dripped blood. And then, faint under it all, the same phrase repeated, softer. You will remember as many. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours, maybe. When I finally stood, the mirror across from the bed caught me. Only it wasn't me. It was a dozen versions of me, all layered at once. Some older, some younger, some broken, scarred. Their eyes locked on mine, all of them terrified. One raised his hand to the glass a second before I did, and when our palms met, a spark leapt out, blue-white, burning cold. The glass cracked, and in the crack, I saw the corridor again, the one of light, the one waiting. The next morning, the storm was gone. The streets lay silent, the snow untouched, as if no one had driven them for years. My car was coated in frost, but etched into the ice of the windshield. Clear as writing were the words. Not yet. I scraped them off with numb fingers, heart hammering, but the letters burned into my mind, permanent as scars. And in that moment, I knew something with absolute certainty. They weren't showing me everything at once. They were pacing it, like a conductor pacing the movements of a symphony. And I was no longer the audience. I was the instrument. Morning pretended to forgive. The sky wore a blue, so clean it felt like a lie that had gone to church. The snowplows had combed the avenues into obedient lanes. My windshield, newly freed of the 2 words, not yet, Fog at the corners, as if embarrassed to have hosted a message from something with better penmanship than weather. I didn't go home. I didn't go to base. I drove to the edge of town where the river fattens and slows, and parked facing the flat white. I set the radio on the dash and didn't turn it on. I set the metronome on the seat and didn't start it. The triangle lay in my lap like a joke I wasn't ready to tell. If the storm was a voice, this calm was a posture. It waited to see who I was after the night had said, "Not yet." The phrase from the static replayed in me with the stubbornness of a toothache. You will not remember as one. You will remember as many. I took out a cheap spiral notebook and wrote ledger on the first page. Not journal. Not log. Ledger. The word has arithmetic in it, and arithmetic, however abused, still chooses honesty more often than comfort. I drew a line down the center. Left, what happened. Right, what I am tempted to believe happened. The rules felt flimsy and brave. Left column, snow froze. Figure in lattice. Voice through the storm. Words on glass. Mirror cracked. Right column, static hallucination. Hypothermia tricks. Residual afterimage from cockpit incident. Sleep deprivation. I stared at the two columns like a man comparing two passports. Both had my face. Only one would get me across. My phone buzzed with 3 messages at once like a cluster bomb. Moran, you alive? The woman. Do not sleep with mirrors uncovered. Do not sleep with anything reflective within 6 feet. A third from an unknown number that carried the smell of an office. Coordination 1400. Routine. I texted Moran. Not routine. Where are you? She sent coordinates and bring the ledger. The coordinates pointed to a substation that had gone obsolete when the new lines went in. Chain link fence. A sign that warned against trespassing for reasons that no longer applied. Moran waited in a parka with fur that had once been cocky. The woman stood beside her in a hat that made her look like she had fetched water from a well long before any of us were born. The broad-shouldered carpenter from the warehouse leaned against a battered thermos as if it were a pillar. A fourth person I didn't know. The wiry man I'd seen once with coil mics sat on a crate counting under his breath. You look like you shook hands with winter itself, Moran said, taking me in with a glance that inventoried damages and bright spots. It said, not yet. I said, what did you ask it? I didn't, I said. That's the worst part. The woman peered at the ledger, then at me. You started counting the forks in the road, she said, satisfied. Good. The phenomenon loves certainty. You have to answer it with accounting. I told him the line from the radio. You will remember as many. The wiry man stopped counting and looked up. Multiple state overlay, he said, as if labeling a shelf. We've seen the early versions, glitches, echoes, small disagreements between times. You sound like a pilot who just got his upgrade. I'm not interested in upgrades, I said, and meant like a prayer. The woman crouched and drew in the snow with a stick. A rectangle. Another. A stack. When the frame presents a corridor, it is inviting alignment, bringing your internal rhythm to an external grid. But there's a deeper move. It can also fan you. Split your time into near-adjacent versions and test which one learns the fastest. Then it keeps the winner? I asked. She sighed. It keeps the compliant. The carpenter poured coffee that tasted like a remembered fire. Today we test you, he said. Not it. We need to know how far you can be braided without unraveling. He gestured toward the substation control room. Windows broken out, panel boards still bolted to the walls like skeleton ribs. Rooms like this used to move power. Any power still hiding in here will try to help the wrong side. Will offend it. We set the room. No corners we could steal, but we could nag the angles. The carpenter hung tin pie plates with fishing line, so they swung into each other like arguments. The woman stacked milk crates crooked. Moran tuned the radio to a call-in show about potholes and left the volume just low enough to force the ear to work. The wiry man uncoiled wire from something he called a loop antenna and laid it in a sloppy oval on the concrete. I set the metronome, but did not wind it. I placed a triangle on the breaker panel and my tin of screws on a boiler that remembered heat. Ready? Moran asked. No, I said. Do it. She turned on a single fluorescent fixture, daring. The room filled with a particular, insulting evenness that fluorescent light loves. The radio crackled and found a marine weather report from a coast we don't live near. Somewhere deep in the concrete, a tone suggested itself. Not a full note, a wish. Breathe, the woman said. Count 7. Skip 8. Give 9 your middle finger. I obeyed. The tone did not like my insolence. The tin plates knocked each other with a domestic indignation that made me want to apologize. The loop antenna muttered a story about distant storms. I felt it then. The fan, the subtle, dreadful awareness that if I reached for the ledger, I would also stand very still, and also sit down and also leave, each choice happening in a near sibling of now. I'm splitting, I said, voice thin. Hold center, the carpenter said. Find the ugly thing that's always you. A scar, a bad habit, a joke you tell at funerals. Anything that doesn't behave. I found the ugliest thing I could that still love me. My laugh, not the good one I give my daughter. The one that comes out like a bark when fear is trying to learn my name. I laughed, awful and honest. The plates clanged. The tone flinched. The fan slowed. Again, the woman said, make it learn you without wearing you. I laughed until the laugh stopped sounding like me and started sounding like a stupid opera. Then I stopped. The room breathed. The metronome started itself in defiance. Ticked once. Remember humility. Stopped. Better, Moran said. Now take out the ledger. I opened it. The left column, the facts were the same. The right column had changed. The handwriting was mine, the ink mine, the words not. Right? You asked it to wait. You said not yet before it did. You were the first to say it. A chill ran up from my hands to the back of my eyes. Did I write this? I asked. The woman didn't look at the page. You could have, she said. That's enough for it to try. The fan isn't just for events. It uses you to generate believable edits. So I can't even trust my own doubt. You can trust your rituals, she said softly, and your people. The fluorescent hummed louder, proud of its own steadiness. The wiry man paled. We're being asked, he said, whichever ear knows at. The far wall began to prefer itself. A faint layered brightness laid over chip paint and old warning decals. The corridor proposed 9 panes, 3 deep, the modern fashion. No, Moran said, and the sound had decades of training behind it. She took the triangle from the panel and struck it once. It rang simple and true. The corridor hesitated. The voice came not through the radio this time, not through the room. In me, not in my head, in the part of me that chooses before thinking. It said, 11, if you can add, you can conduct. I wanted to answer. I wanted not to want to answer. I held the 2, wanting like you hold a live wire away from dry grass. Ledger, the woman said sharply. Left, a voice named me by number. Right, I am giving myself numbers to feel important. The act of writing nearly took the corridor's 3rd row away on its own. Preference despises accounting. The corridor pushed again, kind, patient, not force, etiquette. The loop antenna sang, to no one. The fluorescent synced to something I didn't grant permission to sync to. My hands itched for the metronome. I did not touch it. The tin of screws, untouched, rolled a single screw across steel to floor, tick, and that sound made something the overlay miss and then resent missing. You can also just leave, the carpenter said, voice low. Rooms dissolve when the audience refuses to be complimented. I stepped back exactly 1 stride, then another, and the corridor slid forward to keep the distance polite. It would not cross the loop. Manners. I smiled, awful and genuine. You showed up in a decommissioned lunchroom. I said to it, we brought pie plates. It pulsed once, not the throttle of part 1. A nod. Soon. The overlay thinned like breath on glass. The fluorescent regained the decency to flicker. The fan that wasn't in the room but was in me softened and, if I'm not flattering myself, collapsed. The wiry man let go of a breath he had been saving for a better reason. That's it for me today, he said, and sat hard on the crate. The woman turned off the light with a curt authority and daylight, vulgar and helpful, poured into the broken panes. You're holding, Moran said. That matters. Does it? I said. It feels like I'm being auditioned. You are, the woman said. But that means you can refuse the role. We walked a long way back to our cars, like teenagers ditching shop class. Halfway, my phone lit with a text I knew before I saw it. 1400. Routine. Moran made a face. They will try it in their frame, she said. They will make good coffee and call it mercy. What do? I asked, and hated how that sounded. You don't go alone, she said, and pointed at the triangle in my coat and the ledger in my hand. You bring corners and arithmetic. I didn't confirm I'd go. Not to them. Not to myself. But at 1348, I was in the parking lot of a municipal building that had learned to smile through storms. The lobby piano played itself, and I put the lid down with the same old irreverence, and it hit that wrong chord that makes all the right ones taste better. Conference room. We had a plan in the corner, like an apology. The suit with a Faraday pouch wore a new tie in the color of We Mean Well. The therapist was the same cardigan, inhabited by a slightly different human. The colonel remained a voice on a box because there is nothing more intoxicating to men like him than speaking without being seen. Thank you for making time, the suit said. I brought my own, I said, setting the metronome on the table and not touching it. The ledger I kept on my knee, thumbed open to a blank page. The triangle I hung from a water pitcher handle where it could catch light and nerve. We reviewed your last debrief, the therapist said, tone warm as pawnshop velvet. There are inconsistencies. That's why you keep calling me, I said. Because I'm useful to you, not because I'm sick. We're interested in continuity, the therapist said. Of narrative, I said, not of people. The colonel's voice graveled by distance and choice. Captain, we are at a point where cooperation is less a matter of consent than survival. Whose? I asked. Yours. Your family's. Ours. He let the plural hang like a badge. They slid a form forward I refused to touch. The word subject in resonance lay politely inside a paragraph that pretended to be about support. The ledger's right-hand column wrote itself. Pen at my fingers or not, this is safety. I wrote, with my actual hand, in the left, this is custody. The room presented no corridor. It didn't have to. The grid was in the posture of the chairs, in the way the pens were arranged parallel to a legal pad logo. It was in my urge to wind the metronome. It was in the temptation to sign, just to shut the ceiling up. Do you know what 11 means? I asked the box that housed the colonel. The suit looked at the therapist, and then back at me. He had not been briefed on this line. Walter, the therapist murmured, and the suit's name, Walter, fell out of his tie and onto the table where I could see it. Numbers are how integers make themselves feel like kings, the colonel said. Do not bargain with numerology. I tapped the triangle with my thumbnail. A whisper of a ring. Walter flinched. The therapist smiled like men smile at thunder when they need to look composed. The speaker stayed a machine. Here is where we are, the colonel continued. The frame is not an adversary, but it is not neutral. It prefers order. We prefer order. We can. You prefer obedience. I said not angry, just tired. It prefers alignment. Those are cousins you invite to the same reunion. Walter pushed the form half an inch closer. Sign, and we move you to a controlled environment for observation. Decline, and you remain in the path of something you cannot outthink. Third option. Moran said from the door, unexpected and correct. She had moved like a rumor through their security. The woman stood just behind her, hat in hand, eyes amused at locks that think they understand keys. He leaves. Moran said, Now! I did not wait for permission. I stood. Walter stood. Reflex. The therapist did the calculation therapists do when the lab animal grows verbs. The colonel's voice said my name like a leash. The plan in the corner chose that exact second to shiver. Not a breeze. Not a coincidence. The overlay that wasn't there put a hand on the room's shoulder. The metronome began to tick without me. The water in the pitcher trembled sympathetic. The form on the table curled at the corner. The box speaker clicked like a throat. Ledger, the woman whispered. Left. A plant shook at the exact second I stood. Right. You are creating patterns out of grief. My pen dug a small trench in cheap paper. The tick missed one beat. The triangle caught light and sang silent. "Don't," the colonel said, and I didn't know if the plea was for us or for the frame. It didn't matter. I obeyed the door. We walked. Not fast, not slow, the way you walk when dogs sniff perimeters. The lobby piano lifted its lid without a hand. I put it down with mine. The wrong chord again, beautiful and rude. The building remembered its job. Shelter, not sermon. In the parking lot, the black sedan waited in a place that made it look like a visitor. Moran's truck idled like a promise. The sky had the pale quality winter uses to lie about depth. The woman touched my sleeve. "Tonight," she said, "do not sleep. Or, if you must, sleep in shifts. Not because of fear, because of arithmetic." She glanced at the ledger. "Make the right column earn every letter." "I feel frayed," I said, "like a rope used wrong." "Good ropes have history," she said. "Bad ropes are pretty." At home, Laura had drawn new paper over the mirror with my daughter and written accidents welcome in the kind of handwriting teachers call unruly, and I call my favorite weather. We ate soup too loudly. We let the dog push his bowl around like a skater. We tuned the radio to voices that don't learn their lines. At 22:40, my daughter asked if she could show me a thing, the careful tone kids use when they don't want to break their father. She took me to the fridge where her homework lived under magnets shaped like fruits no one in Alaska buys in winter. A sheet of staff lines. Notes. The melody she'd written the week before. Simple, stubborn. "Listen," she said, and tapped the line with a pencil. "For notes. Off by the same amount every time." I heard it. The wrongness was air. "That's how it keeps finding me," she said. "I wrote it wrong on purpose, and it keeps trying to fix it." I hugged her. I let my face be seen being afraid. "We're going to make worse mistakes," I said, and she smiled like a storm child. We built our night like a barricade. Radio in the hall, metronome under a bowl, so it would sound like a heartbeat only if it was rude enough to start. Triangle hanging on the kitchen knob, tin of screws on the stairs, a trap for things that love clean climbs. The ledger open on the table with a pencil taped to the coil, so no one would claim the pen had been replaced. At 1:27, the house exhaled a steady breath it hadn't been taught. At 2:11, the hour that thinks it owns me, the light outside the bedroom window changed, not brighter, not darker, straighter. The paper over the mirror curled inward, as if the room had been vacuumed by etiquette. The radio drifted off Fisherman and discovered a station where a man read obituaries like blessings. The metronome under the bowl ticked once, and then forgot what it had meant. I didn't look at the mirror. I looked at the door jamb. There's a pencil mark there from when we measured our daughter's height. 3, and then 5, and then 8, each line a small victory over gravity. The lattice doesn't know how to love those marks because they aren't symmetrical and they belong to two people and a wall. I kept my eyes on them. I counted backwards from a number I do not confess. The room tried to arrange itself around my focus and failed. The voice came again, not storm, not radio, not box. Inside, not a thought, a visitor. 12. If you can subtract, you can align without being consumed. How? I asked, not moving my mouth. I have learned rituals for talking to things I do not want my wife to wake for. Remove what you do not know. Keep only the difference. The ledger called to my hand. Left, paper curled. Light straightened. Voice in the bone. Right, grief wants to believe in patterns. Don't punish it for helping. Something changed then. Not in the room. In me. The fan began again. The near adjacent lives try on decisions. I saw myself take the paper off the mirror. I saw myself leave the house. I saw myself sign the form in the conference room. I saw myself smash the metronome with a triangle like a man refusing music. I saw myself doing none of those things. Many me's, layered, terrified, competent, foolish, stubborn. Dad? My daughter said from the hallway, small and awake and braver than most governments. Is it here? Yes, I said. We are too. The corridor didn't appear, not fully. It proposed, a pane, then another at the edge of the doorway. Polite, patient, It had learned from the substation loop. It would not cross without theater. Be loud, Laura said beside me, not opening her eyes. I didn't ask how she knew. She has always known where to stand in rooms I cannot. We made a mess of our perfect night. I rang the triangle hard enough to make the dog tilt his head. I shook the tin of screws up the stairs and let them spill like small, defiant hail. The radio found two callers talking over each other in accents from different states, and neither apologized. I laughed a bad laugh, because sometimes the ugly thing is what saves you. The pain at the doorway pulsed once, twice, a conductor growing impatient with amateurs, and then, courtesy dimmed. Before it went, the voice gave me one more gift or threat. I still cannot tell which. You will remember as many until you choose which of you refuses the room. It left the way careful thieves leave. Nothing broken. Everything moved half an inch to teach you what precision costs. I picked screws out of the carpet until dawn. I wrote left. It offered me a kingdom of me's. Right. I prefer a house with two other people in it, and a dog that hates math. I taped the pencil to the coil again. I kissed the paper over the mirror like it was a cheek. At 8:12, my phone chimed. Walter, we regret your absence yesterday. Another coordination this afternoon. Protective custody remains an option. The word protective did the same thing to me it always does. It made me reconsider all my previous alphabet. I sent a photo of the ledger's left page back to him. Not the right. Not for him. This is my coordination, I wrote. This is how I protect. He didn't reply. Moran did. You're going to need a bigger ledger. The woman added, and smaller noises. Big ones impress the frame. Small ones teach you humility. I drove to the river again because the flat white helps when nerves make shapes of their own. The black sedan sat 200 yards back, embarrassed by habit. I waved without malice. They didn't wave back. The sky had that shine it gets before the cold remembers itself. My reflection in the glass of my window arrived only a hair late. I accepted the gift. I refused a kingdom. The ledger lay open on the passenger seat, right column blank for once, left column crowded. Honest. The triangle swung from the rear view, and the light caught it and made a small star on the dash that wobbled with the engine. It was imperfect. It was real. It was mine. When the voice returned, as a whisper from inside the cheap radio that had learned to sullenly obey me, it said not soon and not yet, but a single word that could be either invitation or warning, depending on which me you ask. Choose. I used to think fear had limits, that once your body had been pushed through every panic attack, every nightmare, every brush with mortality, there would come a plateau, a point where terror could no longer climb. But that assumption was as naive as believing gravity always pointed down. I have learned that fear, like space, is infinite. It began with the mirrors. I hadn't slept for more than 2 hours at a stretch since the night of the storm. Every time my eyes closed, I saw the lattice crawling across the inside of my eyelids, weaving geometry into places it didn't belong. To escape, I covered the mirrors in the motel with towels, coats, anything I could grab. But glass, I discovered, isn't the only surface that reflects. One night, as I stared at the black screen of the unplugged television, my own face blinked at me, half a second out of sync. When I lifted my hand, the reflection followed late, and when it finally caught up, its expression wasn't mine. Its eyes bulged, pleading. Its lips formed words I couldn't hear. That was when I stopped unplugging the TV. I smashed it with the motel's cheap chair until the screen bled into shards. But the reflections found new ways. The chrome faucet in the bathroom, the side window of my car, even the pupil of my daughter in a photograph I kept folded in my wallet. Everywhere duplicates, each one whispering a fraction of a message that I couldn't stitch together. I drove north. I didn't tell my wife. Didn't leave a note. If she'd asked, what would I have said? I'm chasing hallucinations into the Alaskan backcountry? The lattice didn't follow me on the road. Not at first. But the silence did. Miles of frozen highway. No trucks, no other headlights. Just the steady crunch of tires over ice, the hum of the engine, and the echo of my own ragged breathing. At dawn, I pulled over on a deserted stretch. The horizon split between black forest and a pale, rising sun. That was when I saw them. Footprints in the snow. Not one set. Dozens. Bare feet, elongated, splayed as though the owners had more than 5 toes. They trailed from the tree line to the middle of the road, where they vanished, not faded, not melted. Vanished, like their makers had been lifted clean out of existence. I stepped out, breath freezing in front of me, boots crunching. The prints radiated cold, so deep the air above them shimmered. My hand hovered, and frost formed on my fingertips, though I hadn't touched the snow. And then the sound returned. A low hum, like before, only this time it was layered, voices overlapping, dozens, maybe hundreds, speaking in a rhythm that made my stomach twist. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I knew. It was instructions. I followed. The trail led to an abandoned radar station at the edge of the forest, a relic from the Cold War. The dome still stood, white paint peeling, surrounded by rusted fences that had long ago collapsed. A single door hung open, swaying gently in the wind. Inside, silence, thick as dust. Hallways stripped of equipment, wires dangling like vines. The air smelled of mold rust and something faintly sweet, like ozone after lightning. I descended deeper, flashlight beam jittering across broken tiles. At the lowest level, I found a chamber. The walls had been gutted, but not by vandals. They'd been carved, etched to the same geometry I'd seen in the lattice. Perfect triangles that curved, circles that bent into impossible angles. They glowed faintly, blue-white, as if remembering something. And in the center, a corridor, not built, not dug, a corridor of pure light, stretching forward into forever. I don't remember deciding to step in. One moment I was staring. The next, my foot crossed the threshold. The world shifted. Gravity dissolved, then returned sideways, then settled again. My stomach lurched, ears popped, heart thundered. The corridor hummed, and each pulse felt like it aligned with the beat of my heart. I walked. The walls weren't walls. They flexed, bending away as I neared, shimmering with reflections that weren't quite mine. I saw myself in uniform. I saw myself old and broken. I saw myself lying on an operating table, while silhouettes bent over me. Each reflection locked eyes with me, and each mouthed the same word, Sentinel. The corridor widened. Machines floated in the void, vast, skeletal engines the size of skyscrapers, rotating slowly, humming with energy. They weren't built with bolts or welds. They were alive, surfaces shifting like skin and steel at once. As I passed, each machine vibrated in sympathy like tuning forks. And with every vibration, I felt memories shift in me, childhood birthdays rearranged. My first flight logged at a different base. My daughter's face changing subtly like a puzzle piece replaced. I panicked, ran, but the corridor stretched infinite. The further I went, the less certain I was of what I'd left behind. At last I collapsed, gasping, palms pressed against glowing floor. And that was when I heard it. 13. The voice didn't echo from walls. It bloomed inside my skull. Deep, resonant, layered with countless tones. You have been measured. I screamed, or thought I did. My throat tore, but no sound emerged. The light surged, flooding everything. When I woke, I was outside the radar dome. Snow covered me. The sky was starless, the air perfectly still. My flashlight lay dead beside me, batteries corroded. My car was parked where I'd left it, but its windshield was frosted over with symbols. Those same impossible lines. Only one phrase stood clear, scraped into the frost as if by invisible fingers. The test continues. I don't know how long I sat there, shivering, staring at those words. But I know this. I was the only one tested. Those footprints weren't just echoes. They were predecessors. Others had walked the corridor. Others had been measured. And if the whispers were true, some of them never came back. There's a certain kind of morning the base loves. Sky the color of polished aluminum. Air crisp enough to make uniforms look like decisions instead of costumes. That's the morning I drove back through the gate and discovered I had already arrived. The sentry looked at my ID, then at me with a squint that spelled paperwork. "Captain," he said, Did you need to re-enter for the second time, or? I haven't entered yet. He tapped the tablet. You came through at 0516 with an escort. I was asleep at 0516, I said, my mouth traitor added, in quarter C. We both heard the pronounceable wrongness. He handed me the badge the way men hand rattlesnakes to tourists. You might want admin to take a look. In admin, the day smelled like toner and patience. The clerk pulled my file with professional boredom and then woke up. You signed for this, she said, and turned the sheet so I could see my own signature authorizing temporary assignment. SNTL Liaison, Civilian Contractor Support. The date was today. The time was 0521. The pen pressure had the exact cruelty in my hand. That's not mine. It is in every way that counts, she said, not unkindly. Also, your escort filed a visitor pass under your authority, which expired at 0659, and it would be terrific if that didn't happen again. Who signed it? She pointed to a code, Ethan 04. I knew that Office Park smile. Do you have camera footage? Those cameras have a tendency, she said diplomatically, to experience lensing. Of course they do. On the way out, I pressed my palm to the card reader, because it has learned to love me. The green light flashed twice, uncertain, and then, this is the part that stung, it made a small happy beep the way machines do when they recognize their person. I wasn't sure which person it loved. Harrington found me on the flight line pretending to inventory tie-downs. You look like you lost a fight to a pen. Someone sign me. I said, they've been signing all of us, he said. Pre-sign authorizations. Doors that remember salutes nobody gave. The rooms are learning to automate consent. The rooms. He jerked his chin toward the new hangar on the far side of the ramp, the one that had gone up too fast, and wore its steel like a grin. You could feel it from here. An exactness in the air, a geometry your breath tried to match without permission. They built their frame where the money likes to sleep, he said. They filled it with furniture that doesn't cast the right shadows. Take me in, I said. I'd rather eat the runway, he said. Then he looked at my face and sighed. Bring your stupid triangle. I did. Also the tin of screws. Because humility scales and the ledger. Because arithmetic is the last sacrament I trust. The badge reader at the new hangar didn't even pretend to check me. The door rolled open with hospitality. Inside, the light was generous and dishonest. A grid of LED bars arranged to flatter no human skin. Lines on the floor, so crisp they could cut you. Racks of equipment wearing serials that add up to the number you get when you want to scare auditors. At the far end, a glass cube with its own climate and a conference table that could have been an altar if priests believe in swivel chairs. I felt the pressure behind my eyes. That means a corridor is cleaning its boots in the vestibule. Two Ethan techs looked up from a console that had more confidence than is healthy. One wore a lanyard that said Field Anthropology, as if the room were a people. The other had a name tag that read Whitlow and a posture that said he solved puzzles for a living, and then wrote white papers that hurt people. Between them stood Walter in a new tie that believed in absolution. Captain, he said, the word of Lee she still hoped I'd enjoy. We were just about to call you. You already did, I said, tapping the glass cube where a single document waited at the head of the table. From here I could read the header. Memorandum of Participation. Sentinel Resident Study. A signature line glowed faintly, as if eager. My name was printed beneath it. The glass had learned my handwriting. We're past that, Walter said, which is a phrase men use when they prefer outcomes over consent. Today is simply observational. You sit. We watch. The frame does whatever it does. We keep everyone safe. I keep everyone safe, I said, and hung the triangle from a handle on the console. Whitlow winced like I displayed a slur. Field Anthropology tried charm. We're not adversaries, she said. We're ethnographers of an emergent episteme. The last time someone talked to me like that, I said, they were selling a timeshare. She smiled. Then you know how to say no. Show me your room, I said. Walter palmed the glass door, and it opened on a breath. The cube had no corners you could trust. The seams were beveled into courtesy. The table was set with water and pens like a marriage. The far wall, transparent from the outside, refused to be a window from within. I stepped over the threshold, and the hair on my forearms saluted. "Sit wherever you like," Walter said. I didn't sit. I put the ledger on the table and wrote left. "Entered a room that wants to be a noun." Right. You've already decided to cooperate. Stop performing dissent. I underlined performing until the paper roughed up. The act of writing shaved a sliver off the pressure. Rooms hate bookkeeping. "Begin," Whitlow said too quickly, which told me the room had a schedule, and he was its intern. The LEDs lowered a polite amount. The HVAC found the tone. Somewhere a relay clicked in a rack that had read Whitcomb's file and promised to do better. The overlay assembled, not from above, not from the glass, from the table. It rose like steam, grids upon grids, 9 by 3, the modern fashion. It carried the smell of winter aurora and old money. "Breathe," Harrington murmured at my back. He'd stayed in the doorway, one boot across the line, the other boot holding the world together. I placed a metronome at my left hand and didn't start it. I let my pulse do the counting. 74 wanted to be true. I gave it 73 for spite. The voice arrived the way it does when the frame has memorized your skeleton, not in the ears. In the decisions. 14, not a greeting. A measurement. "Hello," I said, because I will not concede manners. "You see," Field Anthropology said from outside, delighted in that soft, horrified way scientists get when they realize they're both right and doomed. It tags him by ordinal. Whitlow tapped something. "Hungry." The overlay thickened. Panes nesting, depth proposing itself like a thesis. The center of the table suggested a corridor extending past itself through a wall that wasn't there to a horizon no building could contain. It wasn't a hallucination. It was architecture pretending humility. I hung the triangle's cord over my thumb and let the steel kiss my knuckle. Not yet, I thought, and the room, this is not poetic, blushed. A warmth moved through the air like embarrassment. "Captain," Walter said softly, "we need you to walk." "No," I said, equally soft. "You need me to demonstrate that walking is possible in your mortgage." He nodded, disappointed to have to agree with accuracy. "And we need you to do it while we can measure." Whitlow slid a tablet onto the glass. On the screen, a live feed of me not from any known camera angle. From above, slightly behind, as if a memory were filming. Under it, graphs with the confidence of fences. Phase compliance, coherence index, subjective concordance. Jargon for is he becoming the room. Left, I wrote, pen loud, overlay rising from table. Corridor proposed. Right, you want this? You've always wanted to disappear into a controlled experiment, so you can stop being a father who can fail. The corridor pulsed. It likes when I tell the truth. "Noise," Harrington said. I opened the tin and tipped a single screw. It hit glass and produced a polite, awful chime. The overlay paused, offended the way teachers are offended when a child discovers a joke before the lesson. I set the screw spinning like a coin. It wobbled, found its ugliness, and fell flat. The pain over it rippled. Whitlow's graphs jittered. "Don't do that," he said. And my favorite part was he couldn't say why. Field Anthropology exhaled through a smile. He insists on the vernacular. "Vernacular built the world," I said. I tapped the triangle. Tiny. The ring startled a small silence out of the HVAC. The pain softened at one edge. The voice returned, closer. "You will tire of friction." It wasn't a threat. It was empathy from something that shouldn't know the word. "I will tire," I said. "That's part of the liturgy." I looked through the glass at Walter. "Before your graphs convince you you're safe, ask who signed my name this morning." He didn't deny it. We had to keep the calendar moving. "You taught a room to sign for a man." "We taught it to predict," he said, and regretted the verb. The corridor offered a compromise. Not forward, under. The floor ghosted into panes. My thighs prickled as if gravity wanted to renegotiate. I placed my palm flat on the table and spoke to the overlay the way you talk to a nervous dog. "Not tonight," I said, and because I am not only a pilot but also a father, I added Please. A pane winked out. Another dimmed. The corridor held. Whitlow whispered to Walter, urgent. Field Anthropology watched me as if I were an instrument from a culture you're not allowed to touch. Harrington cleared his throat, and the glass took it personally. Then the box voice arrived, the one that wears stars like jewelry. Captain, the colonel said from everywhere and nowhere, we're in the final approach to mutualism. Walk. Sir, I said, and let the word hurt him. What you call mutualism is a state in which you retain a noun, and I lose all the verbs. You won't lose yourself. That sentence has been false in every century, I said. The overlay tightened, annoyed. Yes, annoyed. Emotion is a word for pressure gradients anyway. A single pane slid toward my chest like an invitation written on glass. The voice inside me lowered, cooing, no corners, no arithmetic. Rest. I almost did. That's the confession I owe myself. I almost put both hands on the table and allowed the good chair to teach me posture, allowed the pain to count for me. It would have felt like a miracle to be delivered of us. Something small saved me, not the triangle, not the screws. The ledger, it kept its weight. Paper has mass because it remembers trees. I pressed my palm onto the page until the grit of cheap pulp imprinted my skin and whispered, so only my bones could hear, I am not done being accountable. The pain stalled. The graph sulked. The corridor flickered a single beat off its beloved tempo. Harrington laughed once, a bark that would have embarrassed him anywhere else, and the room forgot itself long enough to learn. Enough? Walter said, but not to me, to the glass, to Whitlow, to the budget, and the sequence. He looked, finally actually, afraid, not of me, of the possibility that the frame might prefer my refusal to their protocol. Field Anthropology lifted both hands like a mediator at a family dinner. He's teaching it a boundary, she said. Let him finish the sentence. I did. I closed the ledger deliberately. I placed the triangle on the table between us like a coin. I scooped the solitary screw back into the tin, its tiny rasp shockingly loud in the honesty of a room. Then I stood. The corridor retreated, as if insulted with grace. The LEDs raised 3%. The HVAC chose normal. The graphs chose narrative. The glass door opened with obsequious speed. Outside, the hangar remembered being a building. Harrington touched my shoulder with the same careful 2 fingers he uses on throttle when weather lies. If you didn't hate whiskey, he said, I'd make you drink one. Walter followed. Less tie, more man. We can't keep doing this, he said quietly, walking you up to the edge of a thing we don't control and pretending our clipboards are shields. Then stop, I said, not cruel. He surprised me. He nodded. There are memos, he said. There are always memos. But there's also a door I can leave unlocked at a certain old radar hill tonight. If something were malfunction there and disappear forever, Ethan would cash an insurance check and call it a day. Whitlow stared. You can't be serious. I am exhausted, Walter said, which looks a lot like serious if you squint. Field Anthropology's mouth tilted like a compass needle startled by a magnet. If he burns a corner, she said, the system will rebuild. It always rebuilds. Then we'll burn vocabulary until it runs out of labels. I said, and when it doesn't, we'll be loud. We didn't shake hands. That would have made it another contract. Harrington walked me out into a wind that believed in itself. The sky carried a thin aurora like handwriting done in a moving car. He lit a cigarette he would later deny. Your daughter okay? He asked. She writes songs that misbehave. I said, we're encouraging delinquency. He smiled around smoke. Good, he said. Teach her to hate the downbeat. At home, the mirror paper had sagged because tape is ethics and humidity does not. Laura reinforced it with 2 angry strips and kissed the back of my neck like a benediction. My daughter held up a coin. For Whitcomb, she said, in case old machines like wishes. We drove after midnight with the radio scrounging for stations that don't rehearse. At the hill, the wind made an animal noise around the empty dome. The hatch opened under my hand, like a dog that remembers kindness. Below, Whitcomb's room waited in the species of hushed common to chapels and closed factories. I set the triangle on the rack. I set the ledger on the floor. I held the can of fuel like confession. The woman and Moran met us in the doorway without becoming ghosts. No ceremony, the woman said. Ceremony teaches at your gate. We worked in silence. Fuel along cables that had become hymns to the wrong gods. Rags where insulation once pretended to be a boundary. A match from a book printed for a pizza place that had gone out of business the year my daughter was born. Harrington took the first light. I took the second. Whitcomb, who had appeared like a fact, took the third. His mouth said in the line men use when they decide to be weeds. Fire's the oldest noise. It made the tone miss and then stop and then try to rationalize itself and then give up. The seam in the corner tried to gather itself and couldn't find purchase. Smoke learned the room faster than any graph. Outside, stars rehearsed inadequacy. We stood in the cold with our hands smelling of knowledge. The dome swallowed flame and turned itself into memory. Not tonight. I said, and the hill, good soldier, agreed. On the way down, my phone buzzed with a message that arrived like a raised eyebrow. Coordination canceled until further notice. Walter again, or the room that signs for him. The second message came from no number at all. No text, just a single digit on the screen where no app should have had permission. 14. I laughed first, then I wrote left. The room texted me my own name for itself. Right, you are reading malice into arithmetic. The ledger weighed what paper weighs. The triangle sang a tiny note from the back seat when the road cracked under our tires, and it was the prettiest music I've heard all year. At 2:11, because some jokes are structural, the porch light flickered and decided to be brave. Laura taped the mirror again with a sigh that sounded like choice. My daughter put the coin by the sink. The dog slept through a noise only I heard. The frame will rebuild. The men with shoes that do not squeak will pour concrete into corners and call it innovation. The glass will remember my signature and offer to practice it until I comply. Tomorrow someone will invent a new word for sentinel, so a budget can love it properly. Tomorrow night, a corridor will suggest itself in the doorway of a room where a child is learning the value of wrong notes. But tonight the old machine burned. Tonight a room that signed for me learned handwriting dies in flame. Tonight a door stayed a door. And if the voice returns, and it will, and calls me by a number again, I'll answer with the only mathematics left that feels like home. One wife, one child, one dog, one ledger, one triangle, one handful of stupid screws. Not an equation, a boundary. The hill burned like a confession, and in the orange of it, I let myself believe we had ended something. Fire's persuasive that way. It convinces you destruction is the same as conclusion. By morning, the ash had the color of paper that wanted to be blank again. Whitcomb's Corner, our stubborn analog little chapel, was gone. I drove home with the triangle rattling on the dash and the ledger alive on the passenger seat. Like a sleeping animal, I didn't want to wake. Every turn of the wheels felt like punctuation. Period. Comma. Ellipsis. Laura met me on the porch with a look that says, I took first watch and I am owed coffee. The paper was still taped over the hallway mirror, reinforced with a stubborn lattice of blue painter's tape that, in any other year of our marriage, would have started an argument about aesthetics. This year, tape is theology. How bad, she asked. It doesn't exist anymore, I said. She didn't ask what it was. She kissed my cheek and tasted smoke and said, good. Then, softer, now what survives of it inside us? I wanted to say nothing, to give her that lie, to let us have a day of pretending ash had jurisdiction over memory. Instead, I said, we find out. We tried. We made a loud breakfast. The dog knocked his bowl into a kick line against the baseboards. My daughter practiced wrong notes on the piano until even a metronome under its bowl, hidden muzzled, would have admitted defeat if it had been stupid enough to try. I left the ledger open on the table, left column waiting like a palm ready to catch what fell, right column blank and hungry. At 9:12 the first message arrived. Not a text, not radio. The thermostat, perfectly dumb, delightfully old, displayed a number it has no reason to display. 15. Then it blinked back to room temperature, as if it had coughed. Was that you? Laura asked. No, I said. It was us. I wrote left. Thermostat displayed my new number. Right. You were making meaning to avoid panic. The act of writing steadied the floorboards. Paper is a weight-bearing wall. We took daylight like medicine. Groceries. Post office. A hardware store that smells like hard choices. Men nodded the way men do when they clock your ghost and decide to offer you the country's only remaining tenderness. Silent acknowledgement. The black sedan didn't follow. The pickup with no rust did. It wore a different driver, whose face managed to be both alert and bored, an expression only institutions can afford. At the grocery store, the city introduced itself in a new key. Carts moved as if rehearsed. The beeps of the checkout scanners learned a rhythm, a pattern that made my teeth itch. The automatic doors opened exactly on the half-second, even for ghosts. A child screaming fit tapered, and then matched the cadence. That last one was my breaking point. Moran appeared between cereal and shame with a basket empty, except for duct tape and carrots, which is very her. How is your morning? She said, as if we were both human. Signing for me, I said, in devices that shouldn't. Reports everywhere, she said. Microwave clocks agreeing to the second. Elevators arriving before buttons are pressed. A choir teacher called to say her class sang in tune for the first time, and she cried, and then realized why she was crying and called me back. The Hill? Cooked, she said. Walter sent a note that looked like permission and grief. Field Anthropology sent a book recommendation, as if we are in Salon. We moved to the end cap, where the discount candy goes to negotiate. Where's the woman? I asked. We don't say her name. It feels like a favor. Building corners, Moran said. She says we burned one room and taught the city to be jealous. How do you make a city jealous? You give its furniture a better offer, she said dryly. We paid in cash. I held my palm against the self-checkout scanner, not touching, refusing its theory of friendship. It hesitated a half-second longer than design intended, and then gave me the green the first did not earn. Outside, the sky had the sheen of aluminum Orlon, that false clear that sells you on a live ease. The stoplights turned in perfect unanimity up and down the boulevard. A flock of pigeons rearranged themselves into a grid for 3 beats, decided they hated art and dissolved. My phone buzzed without modesty. Walter. Coordination suspended. Unrelated public safety test at 1300 hours may cause brief alerts. Please do not be alarmed. The words unrelated and please have never looked sillier together. A second text from an unknown number that smelled like a basement. Siren drill. This is only a test. Our city has sirens, and they're older than the software that now claims them. I looked at Moran. She raised an eyebrow. The dog sneezed like a prophet. At 12:55, the first siren lifted its voice alone, a brave old thing that remembered Korea. At 12:58, 3 more joined in. At 1300 hours exactly, the entire network sang. I stood in our kitchen and felt the frame shrug into itself, delighted. The sirens were loud, but below them, softer, was a hum I know like a bad habit. 74 aspiring to eternity. Turn on everything, I said. Laura didn't ask which everything. We spun fans, radios, the cheap box in the garage that plays a ball game in July recorded in 1996. My daughter opened every music box she owns, and every one that had belonged to anyone's dead grandmother. I shook the tin of screws like a tambourine. The sirens didn't care. They were not a corridor. They were an audition. When it ended, the quiet was a statement. The fridge compressor kicked on in C. The heating vent remembered a choral arrangement and contributed. The house angled itself toward us with that polite aggression of a host who has been taking notes all night and would like to share them. You will not remember as one, the voice had told me. I was terrified to admit. I remembered a siren in 2 versions, one that was civic hygiene, one that was rehearsal. Both were true. The ledger trembled under my pencil. Left. Citywide drill at 1300 hours. Whole grid in tune. Right. If this were a test, who wrote it? My daughter touched my wrist. Dad, she said, in the calm tone you use for men who will ruin everything by rushing. Everyone at school, is talking about how they felt the same thing at the same time. That never happens unless there's free pizza. What did you feel? She thought, like the air got straight. Laura pulled her into a hug that had a little staggering in it. We find curve, she said into our child's hair. We teach it how to like curve. At 14:22, the school sent message. Evening concert moved to gym due to maintenance. At 14:23, the word maintenance rearranged itself in my head into frame. I texted Moran. She texted back too fast. I'll meet you there. Bring triangle. Bring ledger. Bring jokes. I hate those concerts. I love them more than my complaints. Half a city of folding chairs. Parents pretending to be moved by children they would die for. Teachers playing traffic cop in cardigans. Banners with misspelled words. It is the exact kind of chaotic sincerity that keeps the ground attached to us. It is also the exact kind of scheduled communal event a frame would love to colonize, because rhythm is a free meal. The gym had been scrubbed of its normal. Lines on the floor polished to grammar. Bleachers drawn out with the mechanical grace of a demonstration. The lights too even. The sound system humming a sine tone that made the back of my eyes throb. I saw it the second we walked in. The suggestion of panes where the rafters meet the walls. The 9x3 repeating in the angle of banners. The way the travel posters for future field trips have been arranged into a grid no teacher has time for. Moran stationed herself by the door with her hands in her pockets, like a bouncer who writes poetry. The woman appeared near the stage as if she were looking for a seat and in fact counting exits. Harrington slipped into a row 2/3 back and became a man watching a basketball game that did not exist. Walter stood against the far wall with field anthropology beside him, both wearing faces that say observers, both fooling only themselves. The band teacher tapped the mic. It popped twice and then became obedient. "Thank you all for coming," she said, programmed earnestness, and I forgave her in advance for having her life used as a set. "Tonight we celebrate." The rest of her sentence dissolved under a pressure so subtle most people didn't feel it. The sirens had taught their master how to be quiet louder. The first piece was a march. Of course it was. Marches are obedience you can hum. The kids lifted their instruments, eyes on the same downbeat, and the air above the gym made its decision. The overlay assembled, low, polite, beginning over the bass clarinets and the tubas, sliding its panes on the floor like a magician setting up a trick he wants to look like an accident. My daughter banged me on the knee with her program. She doesn't play brass. She plays a small keyboard that doesn't travel. Tonight she would sing. "Do I sabotage?" she whispered. "You make art," I said. "Let the sabotage happen by accident." The march began. It was better than last year, because children are relentless about becoming. It was also too good by a hair. The snare locked into a grid and forgot how to flirt. The flutes found a spine too straight. I love them, and I want to throw a shoe. The overlay thickened. A pane slid toward the center aisle, found a line of folding chairs, and decided to enjoy that geometry. Parents shifted in their seats. A baby cooed weirdly in time. I stood, because if the frame can colonize a gym, it can tolerate a man rude enough to stand in the middle of a march. Moran gave me a tiny nod that said, "You're on." The woman lifted a finger, the universal "mind your verbs." I lifted the triangle. I didn't strike it. I held it at shoulder height, like a bell waiting for the holiday we hadn't earned yet. I waited 2 measures. Then I hit it on the offbeat. It rang simple and wrong. The march stumbled in a way you don't notice unless you love the children playing. 2 clarinets looked up, bless their adolescent courage. The pane above the aisle wrinkled. I hit the triangle again, softer, then again near the correct beat, then again late. The overlay tried to compensate. It shifted itself to a new tempo I refused. The band teacher cut a glare at me that could have peeled paint. I mouthed sorry and hit the triangle once more, gentle as a spoon on a teacup, and the pane nearest the bleachers gave way like ice that won't hold a man's weight. Field anthropology smiled. Actually smiled. Walter did not. He spoke into an unseen mic, and a tone arrived on the floor, a sub-bass you feel in your sternum. The pane stabilized, so they could hear us. Fine. I put the triangle in my pocket. I took the tin of screws, and I did the worst thing a man in a gym can do without being escorted out. I walked along the back row and rattled it gently against the bleacher's metal in time with athletic failure, not musical success. The sound was small, unimpressive. The pain near me lost interest in being a pain. It wanted to be a draft. It wanted to be a cough. It didn't want to be art anymore. The first number ended. Polite applause. The second number was a medley of movie themes designed by committees to be safe. The overlay loved it like sugar. The kids in the front row swayed in a way they had not rehearsed. The woman near the stage made a small gesture, thumb and forefinger not touching. Less. I know that sign. Volumes or beliefs. The choir rose for their turn. My daughter glanced at me as if seeing whether I had decided to remain her father. The pianist sat. The PA bled a little. The opening chord, sweet, unthreatening, bloomed out of the speakers, and with it came the invitation. Not a corridor yet. A proposal. Just step onto this invisible dance floor, and we will tidy up your grief. I did not touch the triangle. I did not rattle the screws. I did the thing every officer turns into folklore after and claims with strategy, but in truth is desperation. I trusted her. She came in a half-beat late. It was not a mistake. It was a choice that sounded like one. The second soprano to her left followed her lateness and then corrected it. The boy in the third row, whose voice is not committed to his register, found himself reaching for one he didn't own and laughing. Bless him. The overlay fought to keep their breath inside its rectangles. The sound system took on static it did not request. And then one of the banners fell. It was a stupid banner. Go Eagles, with a bird drawn like a remorseful bat. It fell at exactly the wrong time in exactly the wrong place, which is to say at exactly the right time for us. It knocked a horn case. The horn case toppled. A child who will one day run for office cursed loud enough for Jesus to applaud, and the pain hovering by the rafters gave up. The overlay shivered. From the top down, pain to pain, a deck of cards losing interest in magic. The corridor, that 9x3 perfection waiting at the edge of the stage, collapsed like a polite bow. The PA squealed and quit. The lights flickered hard enough to trigger 50 phones to lift, and 50 cameras caught nothing worth replaying, which is the first true miracle I have seen this year.